Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where curiosity gets comfortable and the universe takes its time unfolding gently around you. Tonight we're setting our sights on something familiar yet quietly enormous, something you may have spotted without ever realizing just how far it truly stretches. We're going to spend this calm stretch of moments together, exploring a question that sounds simple at first, almost playful, but grows larger the longer you sit with it. How big is the Leo constellation, really? Before we drift into that wide, star-filled idea, let me ask you something small and personal, the kind of question that anchors big thoughts to a very human moment. Where are you listening from right now? Is it late evening with the lights low, or early morning with the world just beginning to stir? Maybe you're curled up in bed, or stretched out on a couch, or gazing through a window where the sky's already darkening or just starting to pale. And what time is it for you in your little corner of the planet? It's always a gentle wonder to think that while we talk about stars that shine across hundreds of light years, you and I are sharing this moment across a much smaller but still meaningful distance. If this quiet journey ends up feeling soothing, or if you find your thoughts slowing down instead of speeding up, I'd be grateful if you gave this space a small nod of support with a like or a subscription. It helps this soft corner of science reach others who might be looking for something calm to carry them toward rest. And now, without any hurry at all, let's ease into the night sky and meet a familiar shape that may be far bigger than it appears. When most people think of a constellation, they imagine a neat little picture drawn in the sky, a handful of stars connected by invisible lines into something recognizable. A hunter, a bear, a dipper, or in our case tonight, a lion. Leo, strong, proud, and easy to spot once you know where to look. You might have seen it on a star chart or a phone app, its outline sketched like a celestial doodle, floating comfortably above the horizon during spring evenings in the northern hemisphere. There it is, the sickle-shaped head, the long body, the tail pointing off toward another patch of darkness. It feels manageable, almost friendly, a shape you could trace with your finger across the sky. But that sense of smallness is a trick of perspective, and the sky is very good at playing tricks like that. When you stand outside and look up, everything above you feels like it's painted onto a single, smooth dome. The moon, the stars, the planets, even the faint smudge of the Milky Way, all seem to sit at roughly the same distance, like decorations pinned to a ceiling. Your eyes and brain flatten the universe into a kind of cosmic wallpaper. That's not a flaw in your perception. It's simply how human vision works. We evolved to judge the distance of trees, animals, and other people, not the vast separations between suns. So when you look at Leo, what you're really seeing is a pattern made of stars that only appear to be close together. In reality, they are scattered through space like lanterns hung at wildly different distances along a dark road that stretches farther than the mind is comfortable imagining. Let's take a slow breath and begin to pull that pattern apart, not to ruin its beauty, but to gently reveal the hidden depth behind it. The brightest star in Leo is called Regulus, often described as the heart of the lion. It's an easy star to find, a steady white-blue point of light that anchors the whole shape. When you look at Regulus from Earth, it feels like it's right there, part of the same flat sky as everything else. But Regulus is about 79 light-years away. That means the light reaching your eyes tonight left that star 79 years ago. Back then, on Earth, the world looked very different. Radios were common. The first computers were still the size of rooms. Most of the technology you use every day hadn't been imagined yet. And Regulus isn't even one of the farthest stars in Leo. Another prominent star, Denebula, which marks the tail of the lion, sits about 36 light-years away, less than half the distance to Regulus. Already, without moving your eyes very far across the sky, you've jumped through tens of light-years of space. It's like standing on a hill and seeing one lighthouse on a nearby shore and another far out at sea, but your brain insists they're side by side. Then there's algebra, a beautiful golden star that actually turns out to be a pair of stars orbiting each other, sitting roughly 130 light years away. So now, within the same simple outline of a lion, you've spanned a depth of nearly 100 light years from front to back, and that's just with 3 stars. If we start to include the fainter points of light that fill in the rest of Leo's shape, the distances stretch even more. Some stars associated with the constellation lie more than 300 light years away. Others are relatively close, in cosmic terms, at a few dozen light years. The shape you see is not a group of stars travelling together through space like a flock of birds. It's more like a coincidence of alignment, a moment where your line of sight from Earth happens to stack these distant suns into a recognisable pattern. Imagine standing in a long dark hallway filled with glowing orbs suspended at different distances. From one specific spot those lights line up to look like a picture, maybe a face or an animal. Take a few steps to the side and the image falls apart. That's what Leo really is, a perspective drawing made by your position in the Milky Way. Now, let's stretch our thinking even more gently. When we ask how big Leo is, we usually mean how wide it looks across the sky. Astronomers measure that in degrees. The full moon, for example, is about half a degree wide. Leo stretches across roughly 50 degrees from one end to the other, which means it spans about 100 full moons laid side by side. That's a big chunk of sky. If you hold your fist out at arm's length, it covers about 10 degrees. So Leo is roughly 5 fists wide from head to tail. That's the flat, 2-dimensional answer. But the 3-dimensional version is where things start to quietly expand. If we imagine drawing a giant invisible box around all the major stars that make up Leo, that box would have to be hundreds of light years deep. Let's say, very roughly, that the closest stars in Leo are around 30 light years away, and the farthest are around 300 light years. That gives us a depth of about 270 light years. The width of Leo across the sky, when translated into real space at those distances, also becomes enormous. At an average distance of, say, 150 light years, a span of 50 degrees corresponds to a physical width of well over 130 light years from side to side. That means if you could somehow step outside the Milky Way and look back at Leo as a real 3-dimensional object, it wouldn't look like a flat drawing of a lion at all. It would look like a vast, scattered cloud of stars, stretched wider than most people can comfortably picture. To put that into a softer, more familiar frame, consider this. Our entire solar system, from the Sun all the way out past Pluto and the distant icy objects of the Kuiper Belt, is only about a couple of light days across. Even if you include the farthest reaches of the Oort cloud, the outer halo of comets that surrounds our system, you're still talking about maybe 1 or 2 light years at most. Leo, in depth and width, is more than 100 times larger than that, and yet, in the sky, it fits comfortably between your 2 hands. As you let that idea settle, you might notice a strange feeling, something between awe and calm. The universe doesn't rush these realizations. It lets them drift into place slowly, like snow settling on a quiet field. Now, let's go one step further out. Those stars in Leo, scattered across hundreds of light years, are still just a tiny patch within our galaxy, the Milky Way. The Milky Way itself is about 100,000 light years wide, so even this enormous 3-dimensional constellation is only a small neighbourhood within a much larger cosmic city. But here's where things get interesting in a different way. Some of the objects we associate with Leo aren't even stars in our galaxy at all. If you look through a telescope at certain parts of Leo, you'll find faint, fuzzy smudges of light. These are not clouds of gas or distant stars. They're entire galaxies. The Leo triplet, for example, is a small group of galaxies about 35 million light-years away. They just happen to sit in the same direction in the sky as the stars that make up the Lion. So when you look at Leo, you're not just looking across a few hundred light-years of space within our galaxy. You're also peering tens of millions of light-years beyond it, into the wider universe. It's like standing in your front yard looking past your neighbours' houses, past the edge of your town, and somehow also seeing another city on the other side of the country, all lined up in the same direction. This layering of distance is one of the quiet marvels of stargazing. The sky doesn't separate things by how far away they are. It arranges them by direction. Near and far blend together into the same view. So how big is Leo, really? In one sense, it's a pattern about 5 fists wide in the sky. In another, it's a scattering of stars spread across hundreds of light-years of space. And in a deeper sense still, it's a window that opens onto galaxies so distant that their light began its journey long before humans ever drew the first line in the stars. But let's bring this back down to a more gentle, human scale for a moment, because sometimes the universe can feel a bit overwhelming if you let it stretch too far all at once. Picture yourself on a clear night, maybe in a place where the sky is dark enough to show more than just the brightest stars. You find Leo rising in the east, or standing high in the south, depending on the season and where you are on Earth. You trace the curve of the sickle, the triangle of the hindquarters, the faint line of the body connecting them. In that moment, you're doing something people have done for thousands of years. Ancient cultures saw that same shape and told their own stories about it. The Greeks imagined a lion defeated by Hercules. Other cultures saw different animals, different symbols, different meanings. The stars themselves didn't change. Only the stories did. And that's another quiet way in which Leo is big. It's not just large in space, it's large in time. It has stretched across human history, across languages and myths and nights spent under open skies, linking people who never met but looked up at the same pattern of light. As we continue this slow exploration together, we'll start to look more closely at some of those individual stars, what they really are, how they move, and how their own journeys through the galaxy are slowly, almost imperceptibly, changing the shape of the lion over thousands and millions of years. Because here's one more gentle twist to hold on to as we drift forward. Leo doesn't just look big in space, it also looks stable, fixed, permanent. But it isn't. Those stars are all moving. They're orbiting the centre of the Milky Way at different speeds and in slightly different directions. Over time, the neat shape we recognise will stretch, warp, and eventually dissolve into something unrecognisable. The lion will fade, not because the stars go out, but because the pattern we see from Earth will no longer line up. That change is slow, far slower than a human lifetime. It unfolds over tens of thousands of years, but it's happening right now, quietly, while you rest and breathe and listen. So as we settle into this question of size, it starts to feel like size isn't just about distance and width and depth. It's also about scale in time, in story, and in perspective. Leo is as big as the space it occupies, as old as the light that reaches us from its stars, and as wide as the imagination of the people who have traced its shape in the sky. Let that image rest gently in your mind. A lion made not of lines, but of distances. Not of a flat sky, but of deep, layered space. A shape that fits between your hands and yet stretches farther than any road, any ocean, any journey you've ever taken. And as you ease into that thought, notice your own space again. The room around you, the steady rhythm of your breath, the small familiar world that exists right here, even as your thoughts drift through hundreds of light years of quiet, star-filled darkness. Somewhere between the last thought you held and the next quiet breath you take, there's a small shift that happens when you start to really look at the night sky instead of just glancing at it. It's a soft change, almost like adjusting your eyes to a darker room. Shapes that once seemed obvious begin to feel less certain, and familiar patterns take on a new kind of depth. That's a good place to begin when meeting Leo, not as a neat symbol on a chart, but as a presence spread across the sky that invites a slower kind of attention. Most people encounter Leo for the first time through a picture. Maybe it was in a book, a classroom poster, or an app that drew clean lines between stars and labelled them with confident names. There's the head, shaped like a backward question mark. There's the body, a simple line, there's the tail, a bright dot at the end. It looks almost playful, like a child's drawing that happens to float among the stars. Once you've seen it that way, it's hard to unsee it. The lion becomes a mental stamp you press onto the sky every time you look up during spring evenings. But when you step outside on a clear night and actually search for Leo without the guidelines, something interesting happens. The shape doesn't jump out at you the way a bright planet or the moon does. Instead, it reveals itself slowly, one star at a time, as if it's testing your patience. First, you notice a bright point that feels steady and calm. That's Regulus, though you don't have to know its name for it to do its job. It just sits there, quietly marking a spot in the sky. Then, nearby, you catch a curve of fainter stars that form a loose arc. The arc becomes a question mark. The question mark becomes a head. Only after that do you start to notice the rest of the body stretching away, connecting one light to another across a darker patch of sky. It's less like recognizing a picture, and more like solving a gentle puzzle. And that's already a clue about the kind of thing Leo really is. It's not an object in space. It's not a cluster or a group or a single thing you could point to and say, there it is. It's a way of seeing, a pattern your brain learns to assemble from scattered points of light. If you stay with that thought for a moment, it starts to feel a little like meeting a person you've only ever known through a photograph. The first real conversation always reveals something different. The voice, the expressions, the pauses between words. Leo, when you meet it in the sky instead of on a page, has that same quality. It feels less fixed, more open, like something that exists partly in the stars and partly in your own perception. Long before telescopes, star charts, or glowing screens, people were meeting Leo in much the same way. They stood under the night sky, often in places far darker than most of us experience today, and they looked up. The stars would have been brighter, the Milky Way a clear, luminous band instead of a faint memory. In that setting, Leo would have felt less like a simple outline, and more like a region of sky with its own character. For the ancient Greeks, the shape became a lion tied to a story of strength and challenge. Hercules, in his first labour, was said to have defeated the Nemean lion, a creature with a hide so tough that weapons couldn't pierce it. After the battle, Zeus placed the lion in the sky as a constellation, a reminder of both the hero's triumph and the beast's power. When you look at Leo with that story in mind, it's easy to imagine the curve of the sickle as a proud head, the long line of stars as a powerful body stretched out across the heavens. But the Greeks weren't the only ones who saw something meaningful there. In ancient Mesopotamia, this region of the sky was associated with a lion long before Greek myths took shape. The Babylonians called it ur.gu.la, the Great Lion, and tied it to their own gods and seasonal markers. In Egypt, the rising of stars in this area of the sky was linked to the flooding of the Nile and the return of fertile land. In China, the stars that make up Leo are part of a much larger celestial system that divided the sky into symbolic regions tied to imperial power and cosmic order. Each culture met the same stars and came away with a different lion, or sometimes something that wasn't a lion at all. That tells you something important about Leo. Its identity isn't written in the stars themselves, it's written in the space between the stars and the stories we bring to them. So when we talk about the lion we think we know, we're really talking about a shared idea, not a physical thing. The lion exists in our maps, our myths, and our minds as much as it does in the sky. Now, let's get a little closer to the stars that give Leo its familiar face, because even the most recognisable parts of the constellation carry surprises. Regulus, the bright star that marks the heart of the lion, has a name that means Little King in Latin. It's fitting, not just because it's bright, but because it sits close to the ecliptic, the path the sun, moon and planets follow across the sky. That means Regulus often finds itself near these wandering lights, sometimes even being briefly hidden by the moon or a passing planet. In ancient times, this made it feel even more special. like a star that interacted with the moving heavens rather than just watching from the sidelines. If you look at Regulus through a telescope, you might expect to see a single powerful star. Instead, you'll find something more complex. Regulus is actually part of a multiple star system, with at least 4 stars bound together by gravity. The main star, the one you see with your eyes, is a hot, fast-spinning giant, flattening slightly at the poles because of how quickly it rotates. It's not a calm, steady beacon. It's a dynamic, energetic object, shedding material into space and living a much shorter, brighter life than a star like our Sun. Then there's Algebra, the golden star in the curve of the sickle. To the naked eye, it looks like a single point. Through even a modest telescope, it splits into 2 stars orbiting each other in a slow, graceful dance. Their light mixes into a warm hue that feels almost soft compared to the sharper white of Regulus. It's a quiet reminder that many of the stars we see are really systems, not individuals. Each point of a light can hide a small family of suns. Denebola, at the tail of the Lion, is closer to us than many of the other major stars in Leo. It's a relatively young star, surrounded by a disk of dust that hints at the possibility of planet formation. Somewhere around Denebola, there could be worlds still taking shape, particles slowly clumping together over millions of years into something solid, something that might one day look up at a sky of its own. As you start to notice these details, Leo begins to feel less like a single thing and more like a neighbourhood, not a tightly packed cluster, but a loose community of stars that just happen to share our line of sight. This is where the idea of meeting Leo becomes more than just recognising a shape. It becomes a kind of introduction to the depth hidden behind the pattern. Imagine for a moment that you could move through space the way you move through a room. You start at Earth and take a few steps toward Regulus. It would take you 79 years, travelling at the speed of light to reach it. From there, you turn and head toward Denebola. That's another 40-some years of light travel. Then you swing over to Algebra, another stretch of decades. You'd be spending centuries just moving between the main features of the Lion, and all the while the galaxy itself would be slowly rotating around you, stars shifting their positions in ways too subtle to notice on a human timescale. Seen that way, Leo stops being a picture and starts feeling like a vast, scattered landscape. But from Earth, all of that depth collapses into a single view. That collapse is part of what makes constellations so powerful. They let us hold something enormous in a small human-sized frame. You don't have to think about light years or stellar evolution to enjoy the simple act of finding the Lion in the sky. You just look up, connect the dots, and there it is, a companion for your night. That companion quality shows up in how Leo marks the seasons. In the northern hemisphere, Leo is a spring constellation. It rises in the east in late winter evenings, climbs high in the sky by early spring, and begins to sink toward the west as summer approaches. Its appearance signals a shift in the year, a subtle change in temperature, in light, in the way days start to feel. For centuries, people used these rising and setting patterns as natural calendars. The Lion's return to the evening sky wasn't just a pretty sight, it was information. It told farmers when certain planting seasons were near, sailors when weather patterns might shift, communities when festivals and rituals should be held. So when you meet Leo, you're also meeting a piece of Earth's relationship with the sky, a quiet partnership that has shaped how humans live and move through time. Now, let's sit with something that often gets overlooked when we talk about constellations. Leo, as a defined shape, is a modern invention in a sense. The stars have always been there, but the official boundaries of the constellation were drawn in the 20th century by astronomers who wanted a clear, organised way to divide the sky. Today, Leo isn't just a pattern of stars. It's a specific region of the celestial sphere, with borders that tell astronomers which patch of sky an object belongs to. That means when a new comet or asteroid is discovered, it can be said to be in Leo, even if it has nothing to do with the stars that form the Lion's shape. In that sense, Leo is also a kind of address system for the sky, a way to keep track of where things are in the vast spinning dome above us. This modern, practical Leo exists alongside the ancient mythic one. They overlap, but they're not quite the same. One is a tool, the other is a story. Both are ways of making sense of something that would otherwise be too big and too complex to easily grasp. As you think about the lion you know, it's worth noticing which version you tend to carry with you. Is it the clean outline from a chart, the myth of a heroic struggle, the seasonal marker that tells you spring is here? Or maybe it's just a handful of bright points you remember seeing on a clear night, tied to a moment in your own life. For many people, constellations become linked to memory, a camping trip, a late-night walk, a conversation under the stars. The sky becomes a backdrop for human moments, and the patterns we recognize become anchors for those memories. In that way, Leo can feel personal, even though it's made of stars so distant they'll never know we exist. Let's gently turn the idea around. What would Leo look like if you weren't on Earth? If you were somewhere else in the Milky Way, even just a few hundred light years away, the shape would fall apart. Regulus might drift away from the curve of the sickle. The nebula might slide out of line with the body. The lion would stretch, twist, and eventually vanish as a recognizable form. Another pattern might emerge instead, one that makes sense from that new viewpoint, but would be meaningless from here. So the lion we think we know is tied to our place in the galaxy. It's a local phenomenon, a pattern that belongs to this small corner of space and this moment in cosmic time. That doesn't make it less meaningful. If anything, it makes it more so. It means Leo is a reminder of where we are, not just on Earth, but in the Milky Way, not just in space, but in time. The stars that form its shape are moving. Slowly, patiently, they're drifting along their own orbits around the galactic centre. Given enough time, the lion will change. The question mark of the head will open up. The line of the body will bend. The tail will wander off. Future sky watchers, if there are any, may not see a lion there at all. They'll see something else, and they'll tell their own stories about it. As we stay with this thought, there's a quiet comfort in knowing that while the shape of Leo is temporary on cosmic timescales, it's steady enough on human ones. You can step outside tonight, or next year, or a decade from now, and find the same familiar pattern waiting for you. It's a slow-moving companion, keeping pace with lives that flicker by in comparison. So when you meet Leo, you're meeting a blend of things. A scattering of distant suns, each living its own long, complex life. A human story passed down through cultures and centuries. A seasonal signpost in the rhythm of Earth's year. A personal memory marker for moments spent under the open sky. And perhaps that's why the lion feels so easy to recognize. It isn't just out there, it's also in here, in the way we look, the way we remember, the way we connect small, bright points into something that feels whole. If you let your eyes rest on a clear night sky for long enough, something subtle begins to happen. The longer you look, the more the darkness itself seems to soften, as if it's not empty at all, but quietly filled with depth. Stars that once felt like simple pinpricks start to feel like doorways, and the black spaces between them take on a presence of their own. That gentle shift in attention is a good place to begin when thinking about why constellations, including Leo, feel so small and manageable when, in reality, they are anything but. From where you stand on Earth, the sky wraps around you like a smooth, invisible shell. No matter where you turn, everything above seems to be at roughly the same distance. The moon floats on that shell. The stars glitter on that shell. Even the faint, misty band of the Milky Way looks like it's painted there, part of the same surface. Your eyes and brain work together to turn the entire universe into a kind of dome, a ceiling of light and shadow that feels close enough to touch if only you could reach high enough. That sense of closeness is comforting. It makes the sky feel like a place you can navigate, not an endless abyss. And it's also the first reason constellations feel small. When everything appears to be on the same flat surface, the distances between stars vanish. A star that's 30 light years away and one that's 300 light years away end up looking like neighbours, quietly sharing the same patch of sky. This flattening effect is built into how human vision works. Your eyes are very good at judging depth when objects are within a few metres or even a few hundred metres of you. They use small differences between what each eye sees to calculate distance. But when something is as far away as the moon, let alone a star, that trick stops working. The difference between the left eye view and the right eye view becomes so tiny that your brain can't use it anymore. Everything beyond a certain distance gets grouped together as far. So the sky becomes a single distant layer, and everything on it becomes part of the same picture. Now imagine standing in a wide open field at night. There's a line of trees in the distance, a hill beyond that, and maybe a mountain range even farther away. In the dark, all of those layers blur together. The trees, the hills, and the mountains can merge into a single silhouette against the sky. Your brain fills in the gaps and simplifies the scene. The same thing happens when you look up. The stars form a silhouette of light, and your mind draws shapes in that silhouette. Those shapes, the constellations, feel like they belong to the sky itself rather than to deep space beyond it. There's another quieter factor at work here, one that has less to do with your eyes and more to do with your body. You are small, not in a discouraging way, just in a very literal physical sense. You move through a world measured in steps, rooms, streets, and cities. Even the largest things you regularly experience, oceans, mountain ranges, long flights across continents, still fit into a scale your mind can handle. When you look at the sky, your brain naturally tries to fit it into that same kind of scale. It wants to make the stars part of your world rather than something completely outside of it. So when you see Leo stretching across a chunk of the sky, your mind translates that into something like, that's a big shape up there. Big in the way a cloud is big, or a hill is big, or a building is big. Not big in the way a region of space hundreds of light years across is big. This isn't a mistake. It's a kind of mental shortcut that helps you stay grounded. The universe is too large to fully hold in your everyday awareness, so your brain scales it down to something you can live with. The sky also doesn't give you many natural clues about distance. On Earth, things farther away usually look smaller. A distant tree looks tiny compared to one right in front of you. A faraway mountain looks smaller than a nearby house. In the sky, that rule doesn't really apply. Some stars that look bright and large are actually very far away. Some that look faint and small are relatively close. Brightness depends more on how much light a star produces than on how close it is to you. So your usual sense of small means far, big means near doesn't work up there. Everything becomes a point of light, and points of light don't give your brain much to work with. There's a kind of gentle equality in that. A star tens of light years away and a galaxy millions of light years away can both appear as tiny specks. The universe flattens itself into a field of glimmers, and you're left to fill in the rest with imagination or learning. That flattening doesn't just happen visually, it also happens culturally. For most of human history, people didn't know how far away the stars were. They knew they were high in the sky, beyond birds and clouds and weather. But the idea of light years and galaxies didn't exist. The sky was a realm, not a depth. It was something above, not something extending outward for unimaginable distances. In that context, it made perfect sense to see constellations as drawings on a celestial ceiling. They were pictures placed there by gods, spirits, or cosmic forces, meant to be read and interpreted. The sky was a storybook, and the stars were its letters. Even today, with all our knowledge about space, a part of that old perspective still lives in us. When you look up, you don't automatically think, that star is 79 light years away, and that one is 130 light years away, and that faint smudge is 35 million light years away. You think, that's a star, that's another star, that's a shape I recognise. Your first experience is always the simple one. Let's try a small mental experiment, one you can do without moving at all. Picture a city skyline at night viewed from far away. You see a cluster of lights. Some are in tall buildings close to you. Some are in smaller buildings farther away. Some might even be in towns beyond the city itself. From your distant viewpoint, all those lights blend into a single shimmering outline. You might even trace a shape in them, a curve here, a line there, and give it a name in your mind. That's very similar to what you're doing with constellations. The difference is that in the sky, the distances are so vast that you can't just drive closer and see the layers separate. You're locked into one viewpoint, one place in space, and the pattern you see is tied to that place. This fixed perspective makes constellations feel stable and self-contained. Leo feels like a thing, a shape, an object. It doesn't feel like a collection of objects spread across a deep, three-dimensional volume. It feels like a picture. There's also the way the sky moves that adds to this feeling of smallness. Over the course of a night, the stars rise in the east and set in the west, turning slowly around the pole of the sky. They move together as if they're attached to the same giant wheel. That shared motion makes them feel connected, like parts of a single system. Leo rises as a group. It crosses the sky as a group. It sets as a group. That reinforces the idea that it's one thing rather than many. In reality, each star in Leo is moving through space on its own path, orbiting the centre of the Milky Way at its own speed and angle. But those motions are so slow compared to a human lifetime that you never see them. What you see instead is the rotation of the Earth, which sweeps the entire sky overhead in a predictable rhythm. These stars seem to move because you are moving, so the sky becomes a stage, and the constellations become the set pieces that slide by night after night. Another reason constellations feel small is simply how we learn them. Most of us are introduced to them through diagrams that fit on a page or a screen. A star map might show Leo as a neat outline in a small square, maybe with a few labels and a grid. Your brain gets used to thinking of it as something that fits in a book. That mental image sticks with you, even when you're outside looking at the real sky. It's a little like learning about a country from a map. You can see its borders, its shape, its name, and it feels manageable. You can hold it in your hand. But when you actually travel across that country, day after day, road after road, it starts to feel much larger. The same thing happens with the sky. The more time you spend under it, the more it begins to feel less like a picture and more like a place. Let's gently widen that sense of place. Imagine you could leave Earth, not in a fast, dramatic way, but in a slow, drifting one. You rise above the atmosphere, above the thin blue line of air that wraps the planet. The stars don't change much at first. They still look like points of light on a dark background. You move past the moon's orbit. Still, the pattern of Leo holds together. You keep going past the outer planets, past the edge of the solar system, into the region where the sun becomes just another star among many. Now, very gradually, something begins to shift. The relative positions of the stars start to change. Regulus drifts slightly against the background. Denebola shifts in another direction. The curve of the sickle starts to loosen. The farther you go, the more the line stretches and fades. From far enough away, there is no line at all. There is only a loose scattering of stars in a small region of the galaxy. That thought can feel a little unsettling, but it can also feel freeing. It means the smallness you experience when you look at a constellation isn't a property of the stars, it's a property of your viewpoint. And there's something quietly beautiful about that. It means your place in the universe, tiny as it may be, is enough to create meaning and pattern in something vastly larger. Now let's come back down to Earth for a moment, because the feeling of smallness also works in the opposite direction. Sometimes when you really think about how far away the stars are, you start to feel small instead. The night sky becomes a reminder of how brief and limited human life is compared to the age and scale of the cosmos. In that moment, Leo might not feel small at all. It might feel enormous, overwhelming, almost too big to comfortably hold in your thoughts. So which is it? Is the constellation small, or are you? The answer depends on where you place your attention. When you focus on the pattern, on the familiar shape, and the easy act of recognizing it, Leo feels like a friendly, approachable thing. When you focus on the distances, the light years, the galaxies beyond, it expands into something vast and humbling. Your mind can move between those two experiences, sometimes without you even noticing. One moment you're tracing a line in the sky. The next you're thinking about suns and space and time stretching back before humans existed. That ability to shift scale so easily is a quiet kind of wonder. Not many creatures, as far as we know, can do that. A bird can navigate by the stars. A moth can follow the moon's light. But to look up and ask how big something really is, to imagine layers of distance and time behind a simple pattern of light, that's a very human thing. There's also the role of familiarity. Anything you see often begins to feel smaller, not physically, but emotionally. A mountain you see every day on your commute might stop feeling massive after a while. It becomes part of the background of your life. The same can happen with the sky. If you grow up seeing Leo rise every spring year after year, it becomes a seasonal friend. You recognize it. You expect it. It stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling known. And things that feel known tend to feel smaller. But every so often something breaks that sense of familiarity. A particularly clear night. A trip to a dark sky location far from city lights. A moment of quiet when you actually have the time and space to look up without distraction. In those moments, the sky can suddenly feel vast again, as if you're seeing it for the first time. The stars seem brighter. The darkness seems deeper. The familiar shapes feel less like drawings and more like windows. If you've ever had that experience, you know it can be both calming and a little dizzying, like standing at the edge of a very high place and looking out. Let's think gently about the word constellation itself. It comes from a Latin root that means set of stars. It doesn't mean object or thing. It means group, collection. Even in the name, there's a hint that what you're looking at is an arrangement rather than a single entity. But language has a way of shaping how we think. When you say Leo, it sounds like a name for a creature, a being, something whole. That wholeness makes it feel compact, self-contained. If instead you said, a loose set of stars at various distances in the direction of Earth's spring sky, it would feel much larger, much messier, much harder to hold in your mind. So we use the simple name, the simple shape, the simple story. And in doing so, we make something vast feel small enough to live with. There's one more quiet influence on this feeling of smallness, and it has to do with time rather than space. Stars change very slowly. Constellations change even more slowly. Over the course of a human lifetime, the patterns in the sky are almost perfectly fixed. You can look up at Leo as a child and again as an adult, and it will look the same. That stability makes it feel solid, like a permanent feature of the world. Things that don't change tend to fade into the background. A clock ticking in a quiet room can disappear from your awareness after a while. A steady hum from a fan becomes something you only notice when it stops. The sky, in its slow, patient constancy, can become like that hum. Always there, always the same, easy to overlook. So Leo can feel small simply because it's steady. But if you zoom out far enough in time, even that steadiness disappears. The stars drift. The galaxy turns. Patterns dissolve and reform. The line you know is a temporary arrangement in a long, slow cosmic dance. You don't feel that change. You don't see it. But it's there, unfolding at a pace that makes human history look like a blink. Holding all of that together, the flat dome of the sky, the limits of your vision, the habits of your mind, the stories of your culture, the scale of your body and the patience of cosmic time, you start to see why constellations feel the way they do. They feel small because they meet you where you are. They don't present themselves as vast clouds of stars stretching across space. They present themselves as simple patterns you can recognize, remember, and return to. They offer you a way to connect with the universe without being overwhelmed by it. And maybe that's not a flaw at all. Maybe it's a kind of invitation. An invitation to start with something small, a shape, a name, a story, and then, if you feel like it, to slowly peel back the layers and discover the depth behind it. So the next time you look up and find Leo resting in the sky, notice how easily it fits into your view, how it seems to belong there, neatly framed by the darkness around it. Let that feeling of smallness be what it is, a gentle, human-scale way of touching something far larger. At first glance, the night sky offers a simple promise. You look up, and there they are, hundreds, sometimes thousands of tiny points of light scattered across the dark. They feel like a community, a crowd gathered above you, all sharing the same space, the same quiet stage. It's a comforting illusion, the sense that the stars are neighbours, quietly keeping each other company in the vastness overhead. But if you stay with that thought for a moment, if you let it settle and then gently turn it over in your mind, something interesting begins to unfold. Those dots of light are not neighbours at all. They are more like strangers passing each other in the night, each on their own long, solitary journey through the galaxy, only appearing close because your eyes happen to line them up from this one small place on Earth. This idea can feel a little strange at first, because so much of how we understand the world is built on the idea of closeness. Things that look close usually are close. The cup on your table is near your hand. The wall is farther away. The horizon is farther still. Distance is something your body understands in a very physical, grounded way. The sky doesn't play by those rules. When you look at a constellation like Leo, you see a shape that feels coherent. The stars form a curve, a line, a triangle. Your brain connects them into something whole. But in space, those stars are scattered across vast distances, separated by gulfs so wide that even light, the fastest traveller we know, takes decades, centuries, or longer to cross between them. Let's slow down and gently unpack what that really means. Imagine standing on a long empty road at night. In the distance you see a few streetlights. From where you are, they might line up into a neat row, one after another, each point of light seeming to follow the next. But as you start to walk forward, you realise that some of those lights are on side streets, some are closer than you thought, and some are much farther away. The neat row dissolves into a scattered network of paths and intersections. The stars do the same thing, only on a scale so large that you can't walk far enough to see the pattern change. From Earth, Regulus, Algeba, Denebula, and the other stars of Leo appear to sit in the same region of space. In reality, they are spread out like beads thrown across a dark field. One might be 36 light-years away, another might be 79, another might be over 100. Between each of them is a volume of space so large that our entire solar system would be lost inside it, like a grain of dust in a cathedral. And yet, to your eyes, they share the same small patch of sky. This is where the idea of not neighbours really starts to sink in. In everyday life, neighbours are people who live close enough to share sounds through walls, to see each other in the street, to borrow a cup of sugar. In space, closeness has a very different meaning. Even stars that are considered part of the same local neighbourhood can be dozens of light-years apart. If you could somehow stand on a planet orbiting one of the stars in Leo and look up at the sky, the view would be completely different. The familiar lion shape wouldn't be there. Stars that look bright and prominent from Earth might be faint or invisible. Other stars, ones you barely notice here, might dominate the sky instead. So the pattern you see is a kind of cosmic coincidence, a brief alignment created by your particular position in the galaxy at this particular moment in time. Let's gently step inside one of those points of light and consider what it really is. A star, in its simplest description, is a massive sphere of hot gas, mostly hydrogen, squeezed by its own gravity until the pressure and heat at its core become intense enough to trigger nuclear fusion. That fusion releases energy in the form of light and heat, which then travels outward through the star's layers and finally spills into space, radiating in all directions. When that light reaches Earth, it's been travelling for years, sometimes centuries, sometimes millions of years, crossing empty space, slipping past dust clouds, drifting through the subtle pull of gravity from other stars and galaxies. So when you see a star in Leo, you're not seeing it as it is now. You're seeing it as it was when that light left its surface. That means the stars you think of as neighbours in the sky aren't even neighbours in time. Regulus, for example, might be sending you light that left in the mid-20th century. Another star nearby in the sky might be sending you light that left in the 1800s. A faint galaxy in the same field of view might be sending you light that began its journey before humans ever learned to write. All of those moments arrive at your eyes together, layered into a single quiet view. There's something almost poetic about that, even if we're trying to avoid drifting too far into abstraction. The sky is a kind of time collage, a collection of different eras presented side by side as if they belong to the same moment. But let's keep our feet on the ground, or at least as grounded as one can be while thinking about light years. The space between stars is not just empty in the way a room without furniture is empty. It's a different kind of emptiness, thinner, quieter, more extreme. On average, in our part of the Milky Way, there might be one atom of matter in every cubic centimetre of space. Compare that to the air around you, which contains billions of atoms in the same volume. So when you imagine the distance between two stars in Leo, imagine not just a long stretch of space, but a long stretch of almost nothing. No roads, no landmarks, just a faint scattering of particles, a whisper of magnetic fields, and the occasional drifting grain of cosmic dust. That's what separates these points of light that look so close together in the sky. Now, let's consider how your brain turns that vast separation into something simple and manageable. Your visual system is very good at finding patterns, is one of its main jobs. It helps you recognize faces, read emotions, spot movement, and make sense of complex scenes. When it sees a group of stars, it does what it always does. It looks for relationships, it connects dots, it builds a shape. This is a deeply human tendency. You see animals in clouds, faces in the front of cars, shapes in the cracks of walls. The sky is one of the biggest canvases for this pattern-making instinct. So when you look at Leo, your brain isn't just passively receiving light, it's actively organising it into something meaningful. It's saying, these stars belong together, they form a thing. That mental grouping makes them feel like neighbours, even when they are anything but. Let's try another gentle thought experiment. Imagine you're floating in space, far enough away from Earth that you can see the sun and the nearby stars as separate points of light. You start to drift toward Leo. As you move, the relative positions of the stars begin to change. One star slides to the left, another shifts to the right. The neat curve of the sickle starts to unravel. You keep drifting, and eventually the stars that once formed the head of the lion are no longer anywhere near each other in your view. The pattern has dissolved into a scattered field. Now, imagine drifting even farther, until you're so far away that the entire Milky Way becomes a faint glowing disk. From that perspective, Leo isn't a shape at all. It's just a tiny region in one spiral arm of a distant galaxy. That shift in perspective reveals something important. Constellations are not features of the universe. They are features of our viewpoint. And that viewpoint is tied to a very specific place and time. The stars in Leo are not travelling together through space. Each one is orbiting the centre of the Milky Way on its own path, at its own speed, in its own direction. Some are moving slightly faster, some slightly slower. Over thousands and millions of years, those tiny differences add up. The result is that the shape of Leo is slowly changing. Right now, those changes are too small for you to notice. Over the course of a human lifetime, the stars barely shift at all relative to each other. But if you could fast forward time by, say, 50,000 years, the lion would look different. The curve of the sickle would be stretched, the body would be bent, the tail would point somewhere else. Given enough time, the pattern would disappear entirely. So even in space, these stars are not neighbours in a lasting sense. They are briefly sharing a configuration that happens to look meaningful from Earth. Let's bring this back to a more personal scale for a moment. Think about the people in your life. Some are close, physically or emotionally. Some are farther away. Over time, those relationships change. People move. Paths diverge. New connections form. Old ones fade. A group that feels tight-knit in one moment can become scattered over years and decades. The stars do something similar, only on a timescale so slow that it feels almost timeless. There's a quiet comfort in that parallel. It reminds you that change is a natural part of any system, whether it's a family, a community, or a constellation. Now, let's look at another layer of this idea of non-neighbours, one that extends beyond our galaxy. In the same region of the sky where you see the stars of Leo, there are also galaxies, entire collections of billions of stars, each one its own vast system floating millions of light years away. Through a telescope, they appear as faint smudges of light, easy to miss if you're not looking for them. But they are there, sharing the same direction in the sky, even though they are unimaginably farther away than any star in Leo. So when you look at that patch of sky, you're not just seeing a scattering of stars within the Milky Way, you're also peering into the wider universe beyond it. In that sense, the idea of neighbours becomes even more slippery. A star that looks right next to another star in the sky might be 100 light years away. A galaxy that looks like it's in the same place might be tens of millions of light years away. The sky doesn't sort things by distance, it sorts them by direction. Everything you see in a given patch of sky is lined up along a long invisible corridor of space, stretching from the near side of our solar neighbourhood all the way out to the edge of the observable universe. That corridor is narrow in angle, but immense in depth. If you could somehow travel down that corridor, you would pass stars, dust clouds, nebulae, and then, far beyond the Milky Way, other galaxies, clusters of galaxies, and vast regions of near-empty space. All of that is hidden behind a simple pattern of light that fits comfortably within your field of view. There's something quietly humbling about that, but also something reassuring. You don't have to take in all of it at once. You can just look at the dots, trace the shape, and let the deeper layers exist in the background, waiting for whenever you feel like thinking about them. Now, let's return to the idea of proximity. Because in astronomy, near and far are relative in ways that can be hard to wrap your head around. A star 36 light years away, like Denebula, is considered relatively close in cosmic terms. It's part of what astronomers might call the local neighbourhood, but 36 light years is still a distance so large that if you tried to travel it with our fastest spacecraft, it would take tens of thousands of years. So even the closest stars in Leo are not neighbours in any practical everyday sense. They are distant beacons, separated by gulfs that make the spaces between cities or even continents seem trivial by comparison. And yet, from here, they feel like they belong together. This contrast between appearance and reality is one of the quiet lessons the sky offers. It shows you that what you see is not always what is, that patterns can emerge from things that are not truly connected, that closeness can be an illusion created by perspective. You don't have to turn that into a grand philosophical statement. You can just let it be an interesting, calming thought. A reminder that the world, and the universe beyond it, is layered in ways that aren't always obvious at first glance. Let's gently bring this back to the experience of actually standing under the sky. Imagine it's a clear night. The air is still. You can see Leo resting above the horizon. You trace the curve of the head, the line of the body, the point of the tail. It feels like a single thing, a lion made of light. Now, without changing what you see, let your mind quietly add another layer. Picture those stars not as points on a flat surface, but as lanterns floating at different depths in a vast dark ocean. One is closer, one is farther, another is much farther still. The shape you see is like the reflection of those lanterns on the surface of the water. Beautiful, but not a map of what's really below. You don't have to hold that image tightly. You can let it drift in and out of focus, just like the stars themselves sometimes do when your eyes relax. There's a certain peace in knowing that the universe is more spacious than it looks, that even in the quiet, familiar shape of a constellation, there are layers of distance and time unfolding beyond your view. Let the stars be what they are. Not neighbours, not a group, not a single thing, but a collection of distant lights sharing a direction in your sky. And as you rest with that thought, notice your own space, the quiet around you, the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the steady presence of the ground or the bed or the chair beneath you. Here, in this small, familiar world, things really are close together. Walls, floors, furniture, the sound of your own breath. It's a comforting contrast to the vast layered distances above. Both exist at the same time, the near and the far, the small and the immense, the simple pattern in the sky and the deep, scattered reality behind it. There is a gentle moment that often comes just after you've found a constellation in the sky, when the shape feels solid, almost locked into place. Your eyes trace the familiar lines. Your mind says, there it is. The pattern settles in, and for a while, it feels as if the stars themselves are cooperating, holding still to maintain the picture you recognize. That feeling, quiet and satisfying, is the doorway into understanding the illusion of shape in the night sky. Because what you are really seeing, even in that confident moment of recognition, is not a shape in space. It is a shape in perception. The stars themselves are not arranged like dots on a piece of paper. They are scattered through a vast three-dimensional volume, moving along their own paths, separated by distances that are almost impossible to feel intuitively. But your brain, faced with a flat field of light and dark, does what it has always done. It simplifies, it organizes, it finds structure where there is none built in. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It's one of the reasons you can navigate a crowded street, read expressions on faces, and find your way through a room in low light. Pattern recognition is one of your brain's great talents. The sky just happens to be one of its largest and most ancient canvases. If you sit with the stars long enough, you may notice that the shapes you see can shift. At first, you might clearly see Leo's head, that backward question mark of stars. But if you relax your focus and let your gaze soften, the shape can fade. The stars become just points again. Then, if you gently re-engage, the lion reappears, almost as if you've summoned it back into being. That little flicker between pattern and randomness is the illusion at work. Let's think about what your eyes are actually doing when you look at the sky. Light from each star enters your eye and lands on a layer of cells at the back of your retina. These cells don't see shapes. They respond to brightness and colour. They send tiny electrical signals to your brain, which then has the job of turning those signals into a meaningful image. The brain looks for edges, clusters, and alignments. It compares what you're seeing to things you've seen before. So when a few stars happen to line up in a gentle curve, your brain might say, that looks like a hook, or that looks like a head, or that looks like something alive. Over time, as you learn the names and stories of constellations, those interpretations become stronger. You're not just seeing points of light anymore. You're seeing a lion, a hunter, a bear, a scorpion. The story overlays the scene, and the shape feels more real because it's tied to meaning. This is why constellations can be so different across cultures. The same group of stars that one culture sees as a lion, another might see as a plough, a boat, or a group of ancestors. The sky doesn't tell you what to see. It offers a collection of lights. The rest comes from you. If you want to gently experience this for yourself, you can try a simple exercise the next time you're under a clear sky. Find a constellation you know well. It doesn't have to be Leo. It can be anything familiar. Trace the shape with your eyes, following the lines you've learned. Then, consciously let go of that idea. Look at the stars as if you've never seen them before. Don't connect them. Don't name them. Just let them be points of light in a dark field. For a moment the shape will dissolve. Then, almost without effort, it will come back. That back and forth reveals something quiet but powerful. The shape is not out there. It's something you're actively creating moment by moment in your mind. Now, let's widen this idea just a little. On Earth, most of the shapes you interact with every day are defined by physical boundaries. A cup has an edge. A door has a frame. A mountain has a slope that separates it from the sky. Those boundaries are real, tangible, and shared by everyone who looks at them. Constellations don't have that kind of boundary. There is no physical line in space that separates Leo from the stars around it. The official borders astronomers use today are imaginary, drawn on maps to help organise the sky. They don't exist in the universe itself, so when you say, "This is Leo and that is not," you're relying on a human-made system layered over a natural scene. That doesn't make the system useless, it just makes it human. Let's think about how a child might look at the sky for the first time. Without being told about constellations, they don't see lions or hunters or bears. They see bright stars, dim stars, and dark spaces between them. The sky is a scatter of lights, not a picture. It's only after someone points and says, "See that? That's a lion," that the shape appears, and once it appears, it tends to stay. This is how the illusion becomes stable. It's reinforced by learning, repetition, and shared stories. The more people agree on a shape, the more real it feels. There's something quietly communal about that. Constellations are one of the ways humans across time and space have shared a common view of the universe. You and someone on the other side of the world can both look up and recognize the same pattern, even if you attach different meanings to it. But the shape itself is still a kind of agreement rather than a physical feature. Now, let's return to the stars themselves for a moment, because their positions in the sky are not random. Each star you see is part of the Milky Way, orbiting the centre of the galaxy. That orbit is slow and wide, taking hundreds of millions of years to complete. As each star moves, its position relative to the others changes slightly. This motion is called proper motion, and it's happening all the time, even though you can't see it with your eyes. Over thousands of years, these tiny shifts add up. The stars drift, the alignments change, the patterns warp. If you could look at the sky as it was 50,000 years ago, you would recognize some of the same stars, but many of the constellations would look different. The lion's head might be stretched, the body might be bent, the tail might point somewhere else. Go far enough into the past or the future, and the shape of Leo would no longer be recognizable at all. So the illusion of shape is not just tied to your position in space, it's also tied to your position in time. Right now, at this moment in the long history of the galaxy, these stars happen to line up in a way that looks like a lion from Earth. That alignment is temporary on cosmic timescales. It's a fleeting arrangement, even though it feels permanent within a human lifetime. There's something gently humbling about that. It suggests that the sky you know is not the sky that always was, and not the sky that always will be. It's a snapshot, a particular frame in a very long film. Now let's think about depth again, because it plays a quiet role in this illusion. When you look at a flat picture, like a drawing or a photograph, all the elements are on the same plane. You can easily connect them with lines because they share the same surface. In the sky, the stars do not share the same surface. Some are closer, some are farther, some are much farther. But because you can't perceive that depth with your eyes, your brain treats them as if they do. It's a bit like looking at a reflection in a window at night. You might see your own face superimposed on the scene outside. The two things are at very different distances, but they appear to occupy the same space in your view. The sky is full of that kind of layering. The stars of Leo are layered over dust clouds, over distant nebulae, over galaxies millions of light years away. All of it collapses into a single visual field. So when you draw a line between two stars, you're drawing a line across a deep invisible corridor of space. The line doesn't connect anything physically, it just connects points in your perception. Now consider how tools like star maps and apps influence this illusion. Most maps show constellations as flat shapes, neatly arranged on a grid. The stars are all represented as if they lie on the same surface. That's practical. It makes the sky easier to navigate. But it also reinforces the idea that the shape is real in a physical sense. If, instead, every star map were three-dimensional, showing distances and depths, the idea of a constellation as a neat picture would quickly fall apart. You would see stars floating at different depths, connected only by your viewpoint. But three-dimensional maps are harder to use. They're harder to print, harder to read, harder to carry in your pocket, so we use the flat version. And in doing so, we keep the illusion alive. Let's gently turn this around and think about why this illusion might be valuable rather than misleading. If the sky were presented to you in all its true complexity all at once, it might be overwhelming. Hundreds of billions of stars in the galaxy, trillions of galaxies beyond that, distances that make your daily life feel almost vanishingly small by comparison. The simple shapes of constellations offer a way in. They let you start with something familiar, something manageable, something you can recognize and remember. From there, if you're curious, you can begin to peel back the layers and discover the depth behind the pattern. So the illusion isn't just a trick, it's a kind of bridge between the human scale and the cosmic scale. Now let's think about the role of motion in shaping what you see. As the Earth turns, the sky appears to rotate overhead. Stars rise, arc across the night and set. The constellations move as a group, maintaining their shape as they go. That shared motion reinforces the idea that the shape is a single object. But the motion you're seeing is mostly your own. It's the Earth spinning beneath you, carrying your viewpoint around. The stars themselves are not moving together in that way. They're just being carried across your field of view by your planet's rotation. This is another layer of the illusion. The shape feels stable because your motion relative to the stars is smooth and predictable. Now let's step back and consider how rare this experience might be in the universe. As far as we know, humans are among the very few beings who look at the sky and see shapes in it. Other animals use the stars for navigation or orientation, but they don't seem to create stories or pictures out of them. The illusion of shape is tied to imagination, memory, and culture. It's tied to language and storytelling. It's tied to the human habit of finding meaning in patterns. In that sense, constellations are as much a part of humanity as they are a part of the sky. Leo, the lion, exists not just because of where the stars are, but because of how people have looked at them for thousands of years. That long tradition gives the shape a kind of weight. It feels real because so many minds have held it in place. But if all humans were suddenly gone, the lion would vanish. The stars would still be there, shining in their quiet, patient way. The shape, the story, the name, all of that would fade. The illusion would end. That thought doesn't have to be unsettling. It can be a reminder of how much of the universe you experience is shaped by being human. Now, let's bring this back to a more immediate grounded experience. Imagine you're lying on your back looking up at the sky. The stars are above you, the ground is beneath you. The world feels balanced, held between those two spaces. You trace the shape of Leo with your eyes. You know it's an illusion, in a technical sense. You know the stars are far apart, you know the lines aren't real, and yet the shape still feels there. This is one of those moments where knowledge doesn't erase experience. It adds a layer to it. You can enjoy the simple beauty of the pattern and at the same time quietly appreciate the deeper reality behind it. You don't have to choose between the two. There's a kind of calm in holding both at once. The shape you see is real in your mind. The distances behind it are real in space. They coexist, just in different ways. Let the illusion of shape be what it is. Not a trick meant to fool you, but a natural outcome of how you see, think, and imagine. Notice how easily your mind connects points into lines, and lines into forms. Notice how a scattered field of light becomes something familiar and named. Above you, the stars stretch across vast distances. Within you, thoughts and perceptions shape them into something simple and calm. Both worlds meet in this moment, under the same dark sky, sharing the same slow passage of time. If you let the outline of Leo settle into your mind for a moment, you might notice how tidy it feels. A curved head, a line for the back, a bright point for the tail. It's a shape that feels contained, like something you could sketch on a piece of paper without much effort. The lion fits inside the frame of your vision, comfortable and complete. And yet, behind that simple outline is a stretch of space so deep and layered that even the idea of inside starts to feel a little strange. Because what's hidden inside Leo's outline isn't a single region of space at all. It's a long, invisible corridor of distance, extending outward from Earth like a narrow tunnel through the galaxy and beyond. When you look at any constellation, you're not really looking at a patch of space. You're looking along a direction. Everything that happens to fall along that line of sight, near or far, becomes part of the same picture. Stars within our own local neighbourhood of the Milky Way. Clouds of gas drifting between stars, and far beyond that, entire galaxies. Their light faint and delicate by the time it reaches your eyes. So when we talk about distances inside Leo, we're really talking about layers, one behind another, stacked along that narrow slice of the universe you happen to be facing. Let's begin with the nearest layer, the part of Leo that is closest to you in a very real physical sense. Denebula, the star that marks the tail of the lion, sits about 36 light-years away. In cosmic terms, that's relatively close. If the Milky Way were the size of a large country, Denebula would be in the same city as the Sun, perhaps even in the same neighbourhood. Its light takes a little over 3 decades to reach you, which means the star you see tonight is the star as it was when many of today's adults were children. Between you and Denebula, there's a stretch of space that contains a few other stars, some drifting dust, and a very thin sprinkling of gas. But for the most part, it's quiet, empty in the way only space can be empty. That 36 light-year gap is already so large that if you could somehow travel it at the speed of our fastest spacecraft, it would take tens of thousands of years to cross, and that's just the beginning of Leo's depth. Now, let's move a little farther out along that same line of sight, staying within the familiar shape of the lion. Regulus, the bright heart of Leo, sits at about 79 light-years away. That means there's a 43 light-year stretch of space between Denebula and Regulus alone. If those two stars were cities on Earth, there would be oceans, continents, and entire worlds of emptiness between them. From here on Earth, though, they look like close companions, sharing the same small region of sky. Then there's Algeba, one of the stars in the curved head of the lion, sitting around 130 light-years away. Now the depth of Leo has grown to nearly 100 light-years from front to back, and we're still only talking about 3 of its brighter stars, Adin, Zosma, Chertan, and the fainter points that fill out the body, and the range of distances stretches even more. Some of these stars lie around 200 light-years away, a few reach beyond 300 light-years, so when you trace the outline of Leo with your eyes, you're actually tracing across a 3-dimensional volume of space that is hundreds of light-years deep. Let's pause on that idea and try to make it feel just a little more tangible. A light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year, moving at about 300,000 kilometers per second. That's nearly 9.5 trillion kilometers in a single year. So when we say a star is 100 light-years away, We're talking about a distance of roughly 950 trillion kilometres. Numbers like that tend to slide right past the mind. They're too big to easily picture, so instead, imagine something slower. Imagine walking. If you could walk continuously, day and night, without ever stopping, at a steady pace of about 5 kilometres per hour, it would take you roughly 225 million years to walk a single light year. Now imagine walking 100 of them. That's the kind of scale hidden inside the simple outline of the lion. And yet, when you look up, that entire stretch of space fits between two stars that you could cover with the width of your thumb held at arm's length. There's another layer of depth here that often goes unnoticed, and it has to do with the way stars are grouped in space. Some regions of the Milky Way contain star clusters, places where dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of stars were born together from the same cloud of gas and dust. These stars tend to move through space as a group, like a loose family. Leo, however, is not one of those regions. The stars that make up its outline were not born together. They don't travel together. They don't share a common origin. They are, for the most part, unrelated suns that just happen to line up from Earth's point of view. So the depth of Leo isn't just a smooth gradient from near to far. It's a patchwork of stars at very different distances, all projected onto the same flat picture. Imagine standing in front of a large dark window at night. On the glass, someone has placed a few small glowing stickers. Some are on the surface of the glass. Some are a few meters behind it. Some are far down a hallway beyond the window. From where you stand, they all appear to be on the same surface, part of the same display. That's what the sky is doing. Now, let's gently push even farther out, beyond the stars of Leo that belong to our galaxy. If you look at Leo through a telescope or even a good pair of binoculars, and you know where to look, you can find faint smudges of light that don't resolve into stars. These are galaxies, each one a vast collection of billions of stars, gas and dust bound together by gravity. One of the most famous groupings in this region of the sky is the Leo triplet, a trio of spiral galaxies about 35 million light-years away. 35 million. That number changes the scale of everything. Compared to the few hundred light-years that make up the depth of Leo stars, 35 million light-years is a completely different category of distance. It's like comparing the width of a room to the distance between continents. So when you look at Leo, you're not just seeing a three-dimensional region of our own galaxy, you're also looking far beyond it, into intergalactic space, at light that began its journey long before modern humans existed, long before the last ice age, long before the continents were in their current positions. That light has been travelling through the expanding universe, passing through vast stretches of near-empty space, slipping past galaxy clusters, drifting through the faint glow of cosmic background radiation, just to arrive at your eyes on this particular night. And it arrives in the same view as the light from a star only a few dozen light-years away. So inside Leo's outline there isn't just depth, there's a staggering range of depth, from the local neighbourhood of our sun to the distant reaches of the universe. Let's bring this back to a more personal, grounded way of thinking for a moment. Imagine standing in a long, narrow hallway with doors on both sides. Some doors are right next to you, some are far down the hall. At the very end, there's a window looking out into another building across the street. Now imagine that all of those doors and that distant window are aligned in your field of view. From where you stand, they all seem to be part of the same scene, even though they lead to very different spaces. That's what Leo's outline is doing. It's framing a hallway through the universe. There's another subtle layer of distance hidden in Leo that has to do with time. Because light takes time to travel, the deeper you look into the outline of the constellation, the further back in time you're seeing. Denebola's light shows you the star as it was 36 years ago. Regulus shows you itself as it was nearly 80 years ago. Algebra shows you a scene from over a century in the past. The Leo triplet shows you a universe as it was 35 million years ago. All of those moments arrive together, layered into a single image. So when you look at Leo, you're not just looking across space, you're also looking across time, You're seeing a collection of different eras presented side by side, like pages from different chapters of a very long story, all laid out on the same table. That makes the outline of the lion feel a little like a timeline as well as a shape. Now let's think about how this depth would look if you could somehow see it directly. Imagine you had a special kind of vision, one that let you see distance the way you see brightness or colour. When you look at Leo, instead of a flat pattern of stars, you would see a cloud of points stretching away from you. Some would be close, glowing brightly near the front of the cloud. Others would be dimmer and farther back. Still others would be so far away that they would appear as faint, hazy glows at the very back of your vision. The lion would no longer look like a drawing. It would look like a long, scattered swarm of lights, extending deep into space. From that perspective, the idea of an outline would lose its meaning. There would be no clear edge, no boundary, just a gradual thinning of stars as you move from one direction to another. That's closer to how the universe actually is. But because you don't have that kind of vision, you experience the sky in a simpler, flatter way. And again, that's not a problem. It's just the way human senses are built. There's a certain kindness in that limitation. It lets you enjoy the night sky without constantly being overwhelmed by its full scale. Now, let's consider another quiet aspect of distance inside Leo, one that doesn't get talked about very often. Even the stars that are relatively close to each other in space are separated by enormous gaps. If you were to travel from Regulus to Algebra, a journey of roughly 50 light-years, you wouldn't pass through a dense field of stars. You wouldn't be weaving between glowing suns every few minutes. You would spend most of that journey in deep, dark, nearly empty space. The Milky Way, despite its name and its bright band in the sky, is mostly empty. Stars are like scattered grains of sand on a vast beach. From far away the beach looks full. Up close you see how much space lies between each grain. So even within Leo's local depth of a few hundred light-years, there are immense regions where nothing much happens at all. That emptiness is part of the hidden structure of the constellation. Now let's gently shift the focus back to the act of looking. When you stand under the night sky and trace Leo's outline, you're performing a kind of mental compression. You're taking a region of space that is hundreds of light-years deep and millions of light-years long when you include distant galaxies, and you're turning it into a simple, two-dimensional shape that fits inside your field of view. That's a remarkable thing to be able to do, even if you don't usually think about it that way. Your mind is capable of holding both versions at once, the simple picture and the deep reality behind it. You can enjoy the shape of the lion, and at the same time quietly know that behind that shape lies a vast, layered expanse of space and time. You don't have to constantly remind yourself of the distances. You can let that knowledge sit in the background like a soft hum, while you focus on the immediate beauty of the stars. There's a balance there between knowing and feeling, between understanding and simply experiencing. Let's think about what happens to that depth as time moves forward. The stars of Leo are not standing still. Over thousands and millions of years, their positions will change. Some will drift closer to us. Some will move farther away. Some may explode as supernovae. Others may fade and cool. The layers inside Leo's outline will shift. The near stars might move out of the region of sky we currently call Leo. Distant stars might move in. The galaxies behind them will continue to drift away as the universe expands. So the depth you're seeing now is not the depth that will always be there. It's a temporary arrangement, a snapshot in a long, ongoing process. That can be a comforting thought in a quiet way. It reminds you that everything is in motion, even when it feels still. Now let's gently bring this back to a more immediate human-scale experience. Imagine you're standing somewhere dark enough to really see the stars. The air is cool. The ground beneath you is steady. You tilt your head back and find Leo. You trace the shape. You recognize the pattern. It feels familiar, almost like an old friend. Now, without changing what you see, let your mind quietly add another dimension. Picture that shape not as a drawing on a dome, but as a long, deep corridor of space, filled with stars at different distances and times, stretching far beyond what your eyes can reach. You don't have to picture it in detail. You can just hold the idea gently, like a soft echo behind the image of the lion. There's no pressure to fully grasp it, no test to pass, just a quiet awareness that the sky is deeper than it looks. Long before your eyes find the brightest point in Leo, there's a quiet moment where the sky feels almost empty, as if it's waiting for you to notice something. Then, without any announcement at all, one star begins to stand out from the rest, not by flashing or moving, but simply by being a little steadier, a little more insistent in its presence. That gentle prominence is where this part of the lion begins, with Regulus, the star often called its heart. If you were showing someone Leo for the first time, Regulus would probably be the place you'd start. Look for the bright one, you might say, and they would, because Regulus has a way of catching attention without demanding it. It doesn't overwhelm the sky. It doesn't outshine everything else. It just holds its ground, quietly marking a point that anchors the entire shape of the constellation. The name Regulus comes from Latin and means little king, a title that hints at how people have regarded this star for thousands of years. In ancient times, it was associated with royalty, power, and the turning of the seasons. Its position close to the path of the sun, moon, and planets made it feel like a participant in the sky's larger story, rather than just a background light. When a planet passed near it, or when the moon slipped in front of it, it felt like an event, something worth noticing and remembering. From Earth, Regulus appears as a single clean point of white-blue light, but even that simple appearance hides layers of complexity. Regulus is not one star in the way our Sun is one star. It's a system. At its core is a massive hot main star, roughly 3 to 4 times the mass of the Sun, and many times more luminous. Orbiting it, at a great distance, are at least 3 smaller companion stars, forming a loose gravitational family that moves through the galaxy together. The main star of Regulus is an especially interesting character in this quiet, cosmic neighbourhood. It spins, and it spins fast. So fast, in fact, that it completes a full rotation in about 16 hours. By comparison, the Sun takes about 25 days to rotate once at its equator. That rapid spin has a visible effect. Regulus isn't a perfect sphere. It's slightly flattened, bulging at the equator and compressed at the poles. If you could see it up close, it would look more like a gently squashed ball than a smooth, round sun. That shape influences how hot different parts of the star are, with the poles being hotter and brighter than the equator. It's a reminder that even something that looks calm and steady from a distance can be dynamic and restless on the inside. Now let's consider where Regulus sits in space. At about 79 light-years away, it's close enough to be part of what astronomers call our local stellar neighbourhood. In the grand scale of the Milky Way, which is about 100,000 light-years wide, Regulus is practically next door. But next door in space still means a journey so long that light itself takes nearly 8 decades to make the trip. That means the light you're seeing from Regulus tonight began its journey before many of the people alive today were born. It left the star when the world was different, when technology, culture, and daily life were not what they are now. And yet, it arrives at your eyes in this quiet moment, as if it were happening right now. So when you look at Regulus, you're also looking into the past. There's something quietly grounding about that. It ties the present moment to a long chain of events stretching back through time, connecting your own small slice of life to a much older, slower rhythm in the universe. Let's gently zoom out for a moment and think about Regulus not just as a star but as a landmark in the sky. Because of its position near the ecliptic, the path the sun, moon and planets follow, Regulus has been used as a kind of celestial signpost. Ancient astronomers and astrologers paid special attention to it. In some traditions, it was one of the royal stars, associated with power and leadership. Its rising and setting helped mark seasonal changes and ceremonial times. So for many people across history, Regulus wasn't just the heart of a lion. It was a heart in the sky, a steady marker in a world where time and seasons were read from the stars. If you imagine standing in a desert or on a wide plain thousands of years ago, the night sky would have been one of your most reliable companions. No clocks, no calendars, just the steady rise and fall of stars like Regulus, returning night after night, year after year. That steady return builds familiarity, and familiarity builds meaning. Now let's return to the idea of Regulus as the heart of the lion, because that metaphor is more than just poetic. In the outline of Leo, Regulus really does sit in a central position. The curve of the head seems to wrap around it. The line of the body extends away from it. The tail points back toward it. Visually, it feels like a core, a place where the shape balances. But physically, in space, Regulus is not the centre of anything in Leo. It's just one star among many, at its own distance, on its own path, orbiting the galaxy like all the others. The idea of it being the heart is something we've layered onto it, a human interpretation that makes the pattern feel more alive, more meaningful. That layering is part of how we connect with the sky. We take something distant and abstract and give it a role, a position, a story. Let's think about how Regulus would appear from another place in the galaxy. If you were standing on a planet orbiting a star 100 light-years away from Earth, the sky would be different. Regulus might still be there, but it might not be particularly bright. It might not stand out at all. The shape of Leo would likely be unrecognizable. The heart of the lion, as you know it, would just be another dot among many. So the importance of Regulus, like the shape of Leo itself, is tied to your perspective. That doesn't make it any less meaningful. It just makes it local. There's something comforting in that idea. Meaning doesn't have to be universal to be real. It can belong to a place, a culture, a moment, and still matter deeply to the people who experience it. Now let's look a little more closely at the light coming from Regulus, because light is how you meet this star at all. The colour of Regulus, a pale blue-white, tells you something about its temperature. It's much hotter than the sun, with surface temperatures reaching around 12,000 degrees Celsius or more. That heat is a result of its mass and the intense fusion happening in its core. That fusion is what keeps the star shining. Hydrogen atoms are being squeezed together under enormous pressure, forming helium and releasing energy in the process. That energy makes its long journey outward, bouncing around inside the star for thousands of years before finally escaping as light. So when you see Regulus, you're seeing the result of countless tiny reactions that began deep inside the star, long before the light ever left its surface. It's a chain of events stretching across time and space, all converging in a single point of light in your sky. There's another layer to Regulus that often goes unnoticed, and it has to do with its companions. The main star of Regulus has a close, faint companion, likely a white dwarf or a low-mass star, orbiting it at a distance that suggests an interesting past. Some astronomers believe that Regulus may have gained much of its rapid spin by stealing material from this companion in the distant past, a kind of stellar interaction that left both stars changed. If that's true, then Regulus isn't just a fast-spinning star by nature. It's a fast-spinning star by history. It carries the record of a long-ago relationship written into its motion and structure. That idea of stars influencing each other reminds you that even in the vast emptiness of space, connections can form. Not in the cosy, neighbourly way we think of on Earth, but in subtle, gravitational ways that play out over millions of years. Now, let's place Regulus back into the broader depth of Leo. In terms of distance, Regulus sits somewhere in the middle of the constellations range. Denebula is closer, some of the fainter stars are farther. So if you imagine Leo as a long layered cloud of points, Regulus is not at the front or the back, it's somewhere in between. That makes it a kind of midpoint in depth, as well as in the shape you see. If you could draw a line from Earth through Regulus and keep going, You would pass beyond the star into deeper regions of the Milky Way, through fields of stars too faint to see with the naked eye, through dust clouds and gas, and eventually far beyond the galaxy itself into intergalactic space. All of that lies behind the quiet light of Regulus, hidden in the same narrow corridor of sky. There's a subtle shift in perspective that can happen when you think about that. The star stops being a destination and starts being a gateway. You're not just looking at Regulus, you're looking past it. Now, let's think about motion again, because Regulus is not standing still. Like all stars in the Milky Way, it's orbiting the centre of the galaxy. That orbit takes hundreds of millions of years to complete. Over that time, Regulus will drift relative to other stars, slowly changing its position in the sky. Right now, those changes are too small for you to notice, but over tens of thousands of years they will become visible. The heart of the lion will move, the shape of Leo will stretch and shift. So even this central anchoring point in the constellation is temporary in its role. There's a kind of gentle lesson in that. Things can feel stable and central in your experience, even while they're quietly changing underneath. Now, let's bring this back down to the experience of actually finding Regulus in the sky. You step outside on a clear night, you let your eyes adjust to the darkness. You scan the horizon and start to recognize familiar stars. Then you see it, that steady point of light that seems to hold a small region of the sky together. You might not know its name, you might not think about its temperature or its companions or its spin. You might just feel a small sense of satisfaction at having found something recognizable, and that's enough. The deeper knowledge doesn't replace that simple experience, it sits alongside it. You can enjoy Regulus as a bright star in the shape of a lion, and also know that it's a massive, fast-spinning sun with a complex history, surrounded by companions, shining across decades of space and time to reach you. Both versions are true. There's another quiet detail about Regulus that ties it back to Earth in a very subtle way. Because of its position near the ecliptic, Regulus is sometimes occulted by the moon. That means the moon passes directly in front of it, hiding it from view for a short time. If you happen to be watching at the right moment, you can see the star suddenly disappear behind the moon's dark edge and then reappear on the other side. It's a small, simple event, but it connects the distant star to a familiar object in the sky, bringing cosmic scales together in a single brief moment. The moon, just a little over a light second away, and Regulus, nearly 80 light-years away, align perfectly from your point of view. It's another reminder of how much of what you see in the sky is shaped by alignment and perspective. Now, let's gently widen the view one more time. Regulus is one star in Leo. Leo is one constellation in the Milky Way. The Milky Way is one galaxy among hundreds of billions in the observable universe. So the heart of the lion is, in a sense, a very small thing in a very large context. But from where you are, here on Earth, in this moment, it's a point of light that you can find, recognize, and return to. That's not nothing. There's something quietly powerful about being able to look up and connect with something so distant, so old, so far beyond the scale of everyday life. You don't have to turn it into a grand statement. You can just let it be a small, steady presence in the sky. Let Regulus hold its place in your mind as a gentle anchor point. A star that feels like a heart in a shape, even if it's not a heart in space. A light that left its surface decades ago and arrives at your eyes now, bridging time and distance in a way that doesn't need to be fully understood to be quietly appreciated. Across the wide, quiet field of the night sky, there's a subtle impression that everything above you is sharing the same moment, the same space, the same slow drift through darkness. The stars rise together, they arc together, they set together. From Earth, it feels almost as if they're part of a single gentle procession, moving in quiet agreement from one horizon to the other. But within that calm, coordinated motion lies a deeper truth that's far less connected. Many of the stars in Leo, despite appearing to belong to the same celestial figure, will never meet. Not now. Not in the distant future. Not even across the longest stretches of cosmic time that the universe is likely to offer. To understand what that really means, it helps to let go of the idea of the sky as a surface and begin thinking of it as a volume. When you look at Leo, you're not seeing a group of stars gathered around a shared centre, like people standing in a circle. You're seeing a cross-section through a much larger space, a thin slice of the galaxy where a few distant suns happen to line up from your point of view. Each one of those stars is on its own path, following its own slow, patient orbit around the centre of the Milky Way. The Milky Way itself is not a static structure. It's a rotating disk, a vast spiral of stars, gas and dust, turning once every couple of 100 million years. Every star you see in Leo is part of that rotation, but they are not all moving at the same speed or in the same direction. Some are closer to the galactic centre and move faster. Some are farther out and move more slowly. Some have orbits that tilt slightly above or below the main plane of the galaxy. So even though they appear close together in your sky, they are in reality travellers on very different roads. Let's begin with a simple idea and gently stretch it. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking a highway at night. You see a line of headlights moving in one direction and a line of taillights moving in the other. From far away, those cars might look like a single stream of light. But if you could see each vehicle clearly, you'd notice that they're all going to different places. Some will take the next exit, some will stay on the road for hundreds of kilometres, some will turn off onto side streets you can't even see from where you're standing. The stars in Leo are doing something similar, just on a scale so large and slow that it's almost impossible to feel. Regulus, Denebola, Algebra, Zosma, Chertan, and the rest are not travelling together as a group. They are not bound by gravity to one another. They don't form a cluster or a family. They just happen to share a line of sight from Earth at this moment in the galaxy's long rotation. Each one is following a galactic orbit that will, over time, carry it far from where you see it now. Now let's pause on the idea of meeting, because in space, meeting has a very specific meaning. For two stars to truly meet, they would need to come close enough for their gravity to noticeably affect each other. That kind of encounter is rare. Space is vast, and stars are small compared to the distances between them. Even in relatively dense regions of the galaxy, stars can pass by each other at distances of trillions of kilometres without ever coming close enough to interact in a meaningful way. In the region of the Milky Way where Leo's stars are located, the average distance between stars is several light years. That's already a gap so wide that if you placed our Sun and its nearest neighbour, Proxima Centauri, into the same scale as a few grains of sand, they would be kilometres apart. So when we say that the stars in Leo will never meet, we're not just talking about the fact that they're moving in different directions. We're talking about the sheer emptiness of the space between them. Let's gently explore the paths some of these stars are on. Regulus, the bright anchor of Leo, is orbiting the galactic centre at a distance similar to our own Sun. Its path is likely a wide, slightly elliptical loop that takes hundreds of millions of years to complete. Over that time, it will slowly drift relative to other stars, including those that currently form the rest of the lion's shape. Denebola, closer to Earth, has its own orbit, one that doesn't perfectly match Regulus's. It may be slightly tilted, slightly faster or slightly slower. Over tens of thousands of years, those small differences will add up, and the two stars will slide apart in the sky. Algebra, farther away, follows yet another path, influenced by the distribution of mass in the galaxy around it, including spiral arms, gas clouds, and even the subtle pull of dark matter. So even if you could somehow freeze the rotation of the Earth and watch the stars themselves move, you would see Leo slowly stretch and unravel. But let's go deeper than just motion. Each star in Leo is also at a different stage of its life. Some are young, hot and bright, burning through their fuel quickly. Others are older and more stable, shining steadily for billions of years. A few may already be nearing the end of their main phase of life, slowly swelling or changing as their internal processes shift. These life cycles do not sync up. That means that over long periods of time, the cast of characters in Leo will change. A star that is bright and prominent today may fade or explode in the distant future. Another, currently too faint to notice with the naked eye, may grow brighter or drift into a position where it becomes more visually important. So even if the stars could somehow pass near each other in space, they might not exist in the same form at the same time. There's a quiet, almost bittersweet quality to that idea. The line you see now is a temporary gathering of stars that happen to be shining at the same moment in cosmic history. Now, let's consider the scale of time involved. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old. The Milky Way has been forming stars for most of that time. The stars in Leo likely formed at different points across billions of years. Some may be only a few 100 million years old. Others may be several billion years old. So when you look at Leo, you're not just seeing a group of stars that are separated in space. You're seeing a group of stars that are separated in time. Their births did not happen together. Their futures will not unfold together. They are, in a sense, travellers who happen to pass through the same stretch of road at different moments, only appearing to be side by side because of the angle from which you're watching. Let's gently bring this idea into a more tangible frame. Imagine a long river, stretching for hundreds of kilometres. Along its length, people are walking, some upstream, some downstream, some crossing bridges, some stopping to rest on the banks. If you stand on a hill that overlooks a small section of the river, you might see a handful of people within your field of view at the same time. From where you stand, they might look like a group, but in reality, each one is on a different journey, coming from different places and heading to different destinations. The stars in Leo are like that. They share a moment in your sky, but not a destination in space. Now let's add another layer to this idea of never meeting, one that has to do with the expansion of the universe. On the larger scales, space itself is expanding. Galaxies beyond our local group are moving away from us, carried along by the stretching fabric of space. While this doesn't directly affect the stars within the Milky Way in a dramatic way, it does influence the broader context in which everything exists. The distant galaxies you can see in the direction of Leo are receding from us. Over billions of years, many of them will move beyond the point where their light can ever reach Earth. So even the background of Leo, the deep, faint layer of galaxies behind its stars, is slowly changing in a way that ensures that some of those distant objects will never interact with our part of the universe again. That adds a kind of cosmic finality to the idea of never meeting. Let's gently turn back to the stars themselves and think about gravity. Gravity is what brings things together in space. It's what holds stars in clusters, planets around stars, and galaxies together in vast swirling systems. But gravity's strength depends on mass and distance. The farther apart two objects are, the weaker the gravitational pull between them. The stars in Leo are so far apart that their gravitational influence on each other is effectively zero. They don't feel each other's presence in any meaningful way. They are, for all practical purposes, strangers passing in the same general region of the galaxy. This is very different from a star cluster, where dozens or hundreds of stars are born from the same cloud and remain loosely bound by gravity, moving together through space. In those environments, stars can truly be neighbours. They can influence each other's orbits, exchange material, and even collide or merge in rare cases. Leo is not like that. Its stars were born in different places at different times, and they will continue on their separate paths long after the pattern you see today has faded. Let's think about what would happen if you could wait long enough. Imagine fast-forwarding the universe by 1,000,000 years. The shape of Leo would be slightly different, but still recognisable. Fast forward by 10 million years. The differences would be more noticeable. The curve of the head might be stretched. The body might look bent. Fast forward by 100 million years. The line would likely be gone as a recognisable shape. the stars would be scattered across the sky in new arrangements. Fast forward by 1 billion years. Some of the stars you see now might no longer exist in their current form. Some may have become red giants. Some may have shed their outer layers. A few might have ended their lives in quiet fades or dramatic explosions. In none of those futures would the stars of Leo ever truly come together. Their paths might cross in the sense that they pass through the same general region of the galaxy, but the odds of two stars actually approaching close enough to interact are incredibly small. So, never meet is not an exaggeration. It's a realistic description of how isolated stars are from one another, even when they appear close in the sky. Now, let's gently bring this idea back to the experience of standing under the night sky. When you look at Leo, it feels like a single thing, a shape, a presence, something that belongs together. And in a way, it does. It belongs together in your perception, in your culture, in your memory. But in the physical universe, it is a gathering of individuals, each one distant, each one separate, each one following its own long story. There's a quiet resonance in that idea. It mirrors something about human experience. You can stand in a crowd, surrounded by people, and still know that each person there has their own life, their own past, their own future, their own path that only briefly overlaps with yours. The stars in Leo are like that crowd. They share your field of view, not your journey. Now, let's consider one more subtle layer of separation, and it has to do with the speed of information. Even if two stars were moving toward each other, any change in one would take time to be felt by the other. Gravity travels at the speed of light, so if one star suddenly changed, exploded, or vanished, the gravitational effect of that change would take years, decades, or centuries to reach another star. So even in a universe governed by forces that connect everything, those connections are delayed by distance. The stars in Leo are not just far apart in space. They're far apart in communication. They exist in their own quiet bubbles of influence, their own small domains of space-time, only loosely tied to the rest of the galaxy by slow, gentle forces that play out over immense spans of time. Now, let's shift perspective slightly and think about how this separation feels from Earth. From where you stand, the sky offers you a kind of unity. The stars move together, the shapes hold. The night feels cohesive. This is another example of how perspective can smooth over complexity. The deep separations between stars are hidden behind the simplicity of the view. That simplicity can be comforting. It gives you something to hold on to, something to recognize. But the deeper reality doesn't take that away. It adds another layer to it. You can look at Leo and see a lion. You can also look at Leo and see a scattering of distant suns, each one alone in a vast quiet sea of space. Both views are true at the same time. Now let's gently consider what it would mean for stars to meet, in the rare cases when they do. In dense regions of the galaxy, such as the cores of star clusters or the crowded centres of galaxies, stars can pass close enough to affect each other. They can exchange material. They can alter each other's orbits. In very rare cases, they can collide or merge, creating larger, more massive stars. These events are dramatic on a cosmic scale, releasing enormous amounts of energy and changing the local environment in profound ways. But Leo's stars are not in one of those crowded neighbourhoods. They are in a relatively quiet part of the galaxy, where stars are spread out and encounters are unlikely. So the lion remains a collection of solitary travellers, sharing a view, not a path. Now, let's bring this back down to a gentle, human scale again. Imagine standing in a large open field at night, with a few lanterns scattered across it. From a distance, the lanterns might form a pattern, maybe a line, maybe a curve. You might give that pattern a name, but if you walked out to each lantern, you would find that they're far apart, each one lighting its own small patch of ground, each one separate. The pattern exists only from where you stand. The stars in Leo are like those lanterns, only separated by distances so large that Walking between them is not something you can realistically imagine. Picture this for a moment. Instead of standing on Earth and looking up at Leo, imagine that you could gently step outside the planet itself, not in a dramatic rocket launch or a rush of engines, but in a slow, drifting way, as if the ground simply let go of you and allowed you to float outward into space. The familiar curve of the lion would still be there at first, resting against the dark like a drawing on a window. But as you continue to move, something subtle would begin to change. The shape would loosen, the neat outline would start to stretch. The simple picture would begin to reveal its true size. This is what it means to stretch Leo across real space. From Earth, Leo fits comfortably into a portion of the sky that feels easy to manage. You can find it with a few reference points, trace its shape in a matter of seconds, and move on. But if you translate that flat two-dimensional pattern into the three-dimensional reality of the galaxy, the constellation becomes something entirely different. It becomes a scattered region of stars spread across a vast volume, one that can only really be appreciated when you step away from the single viewpoint that holds the shape together. Let's begin with the idea of width. In the sky, Leo spans about 50 degrees from one end to the other. That's roughly the width of 5 fists held at arm's length. It feels wide but still contained, like a large but manageable section of the night. Now, let's turn that angle into a real distance. If you take an average distance for the stars in Leo, somewhere around 150 light-years, and apply a bit of geometry, that 50-degree span translates into a physical width of more than 130 light-years from one side of the line to the other. That means if you could draw a straight line from the star at one end of Leo's outline to the star at the other, through space rather than across the sky, you would be crossing a region wider than most people can meaningfully imagine. For comparison, our entire solar system, including the distant cloud of comets that surrounds it, might span a couple of light-years at most. That means you could fit dozens of solar systems side by side across the width of Leo's real physical spread, and that's just the width. Now, let's gently layer in the depth. As you've already explored, the stars of Leo are not all at the same distance. Some are relatively close, a few dozen light-years away. Others are more than 300 light-years distant. That gives the constellation a depth of a few hundred light-years, like a long stretched-out cloud of points rather than a thin sheet. So when you combine width and depth, Leo becomes a kind of three-dimensional region of space, not a flat drawing. To help that idea settle, imagine a large, dark room filled with small, glowing lanterns. Some are close to the door where you stand. Some are far back near the opposite wall. Some are spread out to the left and right. From the doorway you might be able to trace a simple shape among them, a curve or a line. But if you could walk into the room, you would see that the lanterns are scattered throughout the space, not arranged on a single surface. That room, in a very loose way, is what Leo is like in the galaxy. Now, let's think about scale again, because it's easy to let words like hundreds of light-years float by without really touching them. A light-year, as a reminder, is about 9.5 trillion kilometres. If you tried to travel 1 light-year at the speed of a commercial airplane, it would take you over 1,000,000 years. So when we say Leo is more than 100 light-years wide and several hundred light-years deep, we're talking about distances that stretch far beyond any journey a human could ever take. And yet, all of that fits into a shape you can hold in your vision. Now let's consider how Leo sits within the larger structure of the Milky Way. Our galaxy is a flattened disk with spiral arms, something like a glowing pinwheel made of stars and dust. The Sun is located in one of those arms, about halfway out from the centre. Leo's stars are part of that same general region, scattered within the same broad spiral arm, or its neighbouring areas. So when you stretch Leo across real space, you're not just stretching it in empty void, you're stretching it across a piece of the galaxy's structure. Some of Leo's stars may be slightly above the main plane of the galaxy, some may be slightly below, some may be closer to the inner edge of the spiral arm, others may be drifting toward the outer edge. This gives the constellation a kind of subtle thickness, not just depth along your line of sight, but also a vertical spread relative to the galaxy's disk. Now, let's imagine what Leo would look like if you could see it from above the Milky Way, looking down at the galaxy as a whole. From that perspective, you wouldn't see a lion at all. You would see a loose scattering of stars spread across a small patch of one spiral arm. There would be no obvious shape, no head or tail or body, just a cluster of points in a sea of countless others. The lion exists only when you look from Earth, so stretching Leo across real space also means letting go of the idea that it has a natural centre or a natural boundary. Those are things we've given it, not things the universe has built into it. Let's gently follow one star as a way of exploring this further. Imagine starting at Denebola, the tail of the lion. You drift away from Earth and head toward it. After 36 years of travelling at the speed of light, you arrive at a bright young star surrounded by a disk of dust. From there you turn and look back toward Earth. The sun would be a faint, unremarkable point of light among many others. Now you turn again and head toward Regulus. That's another journey of more than 40 light years. You pass through long stretches of near-empty space, with only the occasional star drifting past in the distance. When you arrive at Regulus, you find a fast-spinning, flattened star, blazing with energy, surrounded by faint companions. From this new vantage point, Denebola and Earth are just 2 more points in a wide field of stars. Then you set off toward Algeba, another 50 or so light-years away. Again, you cross a vast region of darkness, with only the faint glow of distant stars and the soft haze of the Milky Way to keep you company. If you continued this journey, moving from star to star within Leo, you would spend centuries travelling between them, even at the speed of light. That's what it means to stretch the constellation across real space. It's not something you can take in at once. It's something that unfolds slowly, star by star, distance by distance. Now, let's consider how Leo's real space size compares to other familiar structures. A typical open star cluster, where stars are born together and remain loosely bound, might be a few dozen light-years across. A large one might be 50 light-years wide. Leo, in its real space spread, is several times larger than that. A giant molecular cloud, the kind of place where stars are born, might be hundreds of light-years across. Leo's width and depth are comparable to that, even though Leo itself is not a cloud or a cluster, just a pattern of unrelated stars. A small galaxy, like a dwarf galaxy, might be a few thousand light-years across. Compared to that, Leo is still relatively small. But compared to most things we deal with in everyday astronomy, it's quite large. So Leo sits in an interesting middle ground. It's much larger than most star groups we talk about, but much smaller than the grand structures of galaxies. Now, let's gently expand the idea again, because the real space stretch of Leo doesn't stop with its stars. As you've already touched on, behind Leo, in the same direction in the sky, lie distant galaxies. These galaxies are not part of Leo in any physical sense, but they are part of the same corridor of space you're looking down. So if you truly stretch Leo across real space, you have to include not just the few hundred light-years of the constellation stars, but the millions and billions of light-years that extend beyond them. The Leo triplet, for example, sits about 35 million light-years away. Beyond that are more galaxies, clusters of galaxies, and vast regions of space where there are few stars at all. So the real space stretch of Leo, if you define it by the direction it points, rather than by the stars that form its shape, goes all the way to the edge of the observable universe. That's a strange and gentle idea to sit with. A shape you can trace with your eyes opens onto a depth that reaches billions of light-years into space and billions of years into the past. Now let's think about how astronomers try to make sense of this kind of size. In astronomy, size is often a tricky concept, because so much of what we see is projection. A cluster of stars might look large in the sky, but be relatively small in space. A galaxy might look tiny, but be enormous. For constellations, astronomers usually avoid talking about size in a physical sense, because there is no single, well-defined boundary. Instead, they talk about angular size, how much of the sky something covers, and about the distances to individual stars within that region. So when you ask how big Leo is, the answer depends on what you mean by big. Big in the sky, big in space, big in time, big in story. All of those are different kinds of size. Now, let's gently bring this back to the experience of looking up again. Imagine you're outside on a clear night. You find Leo, you trace its shape. It feels like a simple, friendly pattern. Now, without changing what you see, let your mind quietly stretch that pattern outward. Picture each star as a point in a vast three-dimensional web. Picture the lines between them not as flat connections, but as long, invisible threads stretching through space. You don't have to visualize it perfectly. You can just let the idea of depth sit behind the image like a soft echo. There's a certain calm in knowing that what you see is just the surface of something much larger. Now let's consider how time adds another dimension to this stretch. As the stars move through the galaxy, the real space shape of Leo is changing. The distances between its stars are slowly increasing or decreasing. The width and depth of the region are shifting. So even the three-dimensional version of Leo you might imagine today is temporary. Given enough time, the region of space that currently contains Leo's stars will be spread out across a much larger area of the galaxy. Some of those stars may drift into entirely different parts of the sky. Others may fade or change. So stretching Leo across real space also means stretching it across real time. It's not a fixed structure. It's a momentary arrangement in a long ongoing flow. Now, let's bring this back down to something close and familiar again. You're here, in a room, or on a bed, or in a chair. The space around you has a size you can feel. You can reach out and touch the walls, the floor, the furniture. Your world is measured in steps and arm lengths. Above you, the world is measured in light years. And yet, you can hold both in your awareness at the same time. You can feel the closeness of your own space and at the same time, let your thoughts drift across the wide, stretched-out region of space that makes up Leo's real form. That gentle shifting between scales is part of what makes looking at the sky such a calming experience for many people. It reminds you that there's a bigger picture, but it doesn't demand that you fully understand it. You can just let it be there, quietly in the background. A lion that fits between your hands in the sky, but spreads across a region of the galaxy wider than most journeys could ever reach. A simple shape that opens into a vast layered corridor of stars and distant galaxies. And here you are, resting comfortably beneath it, holding both the small and the immense in the same quiet moment. Beyond the simple width you trace with your eyes, there's another dimension to Leo that quietly changes everything. And it doesn't reveal itself until you stop thinking of the constellation as something stretched across the sky and start thinking of it as something that extends away from you into the dark layered space beyond your own atmosphere. Depth is the part of Leo you never actually see, but it's the part that turns a flat picture into a vast region of the galaxy. From Earth, it's easy to imagine the stars as if they're pinned to a distant dome, all resting at the same invisible distance. Your eyes move from one to the next, and your mind connects them into a shape that feels complete and contained. But when you begin to include depth, when you start to think about how far away each star really is, that contained shape quietly opens up into something much larger. Let's begin by gently reframing what depth means in this context. Depth is not just how far away the farthest star in Leo is compared to the closest one. It's the full stretch of space that lies along the narrow corridor of sky the constellation occupies. It's the layered arrangement of stars, gas, dust, and distant galaxies that all happen to line up in that one direction from Earth. So when you look at Leo, you're not looking at a slice of the universe. You're looking down a long tunnel through it. Now, let's walk slowly through that tunnel, starting close and moving outward. The nearest stars associated with Leo are a few dozen light years away. That's already a distance so large that if you could travel it at the speed of light, it would take decades. In that first layer of depth, you're still in what astronomers might call the local neighbourhood of the Sun. This is a region of the Milky Way where stars are relatively sparse, separated by several light years of space. In this near layer, space feels quiet and open. The stars are scattered, not crowded. There are no dense clusters or massive nebulae filling the view. It's a calm stretch of the galaxy, a place where stars drift along their orbits with plenty of room between them. As you move farther out, past the nearest stars, you enter a middle layer of Leo's depth, where many of its brighter, more recognisable points of light reside. Regulus, Algebra, Zosma, and others sit in this range, roughly between 70 and 200 light-years away. Here the region still feels like part of the Sun's broader stellar neighbourhood, but you're starting to move into slightly denser parts of the galaxy. There are more stars in the background, more faint points of light filling in the darkness. If you could see this region up close, you would find a gentle mix of stars of different types and ages. Hot, young stars shining brightly, older, cooler stars glowing more softly, systems with multiple stars orbiting each other, perhaps even the faint glow of dust reflecting starlight, though nothing dramatic enough to stand out to the naked eye from Earth. This middle layer is where much of the body of Leo lives, in terms of the stars that form its familiar shape. But the tunnel doesn't stop there. As you continue outward, beyond a few hundred light years, the stars that belong to Leo's outline begin to thin out. The constellation itself, as a group of recognisable points, fades into the general background of the Milky Way. Yet the depth continues. Now you're looking through regions of the galaxy filled with countless faint stars that are too dim to see without a telescope. These are suns like our own, red dwarfs, white dwarfs, and distant giants, all contributing a soft collective glow to the Milky Way's band across the sky. This part of the tunnel is thick with history. Many of these stars have been shining for billions of years. Some may already be nearing the end of their lives. Others are just beginning. And then, if you keep going, you eventually leave the Milky Way itself. This is where Leo's depth becomes something almost entirely different. Beyond the edge of our galaxy lies intergalactic space, a vast expanse where the distances between objects grow even more extreme. The stars are no longer the main features. Instead, you begin to encounter other galaxies, each one a city of billions of stars drifting through the cosmic web. In the direction of Leo, one of the most famous of these distant landmarks is the Leo triplet, a small group of spiral galaxies about 35 million light-years away. By the time you reach that point in the tunnel, you've crossed a gulf so wide that the entire span of Leo's stars, from the nearest to the farthest, feels almost like a minor detail by comparison. And beyond the Leo triplet, there are more galaxies, clusters of galaxies, filaments of galaxies stretching across hundreds of millions of light-years, and between them, vast regions of near-empty space where matter is so thinly spread that a single atom might drift for kilometres before encountering another. So when you include depth, Leo is no longer just a region of a few hundred light-years within the Milky Way. It becomes a viewing corridor that extends tens of millions and eventually billions of light-years into the universe. Let's pause on that and try to make it feel a little more approachable. Imagine standing at the entrance of a very long hallway. The walls are lined with doors. Some are close to you, some are far down the hall. At the very end there's a window that looks out into another building across a wide street. When you stand at the entrance, all of those doors and the distant window are part of the same view. They're all framed by the same doorway. Leo is like that doorway. The stars of the constellation are the near and middle doors. The distant galaxies are the window at the end, and the hallway itself is the long stretch of space between them. Now let's think about how this depth changes the idea of size. If you only consider Leo's width across the sky, you get a sense of something that's large but manageable, a few fists wide, a noticeable but contained part of the night. If you add the depth of a few hundred light years, the constellation becomes a three-dimensional region, something more like a cloud or a loose swarm of stars. But if you include the full depth of the tunnel, stretching out to distant galaxies and beyond, Leo becomes something much closer to a line of sight through the universe. Its size becomes, in a sense, as big as the universe itself in that direction. That's a strange and quiet shift. The lion stops being an object and starts being a perspective. Now let's consider how astronomers deal with this. In professional astronomy, constellations are not treated as physical structures. They are treated as regions of the sky, defined by boundaries on a map of the celestial sphere. These boundaries tell astronomers where to look when they say an object is in Leo. So when a galaxy, a comet, or an asteroid is said to be in Leo, it doesn't mean it's physically related to the stars of the lion. It just means it appears in that part of the sky from Earth. This practical definition reflects the idea of depth very clearly. Leo is not a box in space. It's a direction. Now let's gently explore how this depth would feel if you could experience it directly. Imagine that you could move forward along your line of sight, drifting away from Earth and into the tunnel of Leo. At first, the sun would quickly fade behind you, becoming just another star in the background. The familiar constellations of Earth's sky would begin to dissolve as the relative positions of stars shift. You would pass Denebola, then Regulus, then Algebra, each one a blazing sun in its own right, each one surrounded by its own small domain of planets, dust and light. Between these encounters, you would spend long stretches in deep space, where the nearest star is several light years away, and the darkness feels almost complete. As you move farther out, the stars of the Milky Way would begin to cluster together in your view, forming a glowing disk behind you. Ahead, faint smudges of light would start to appear, the first hints of other galaxies. You would drift past the Leo triplet, three massive spiral systems locked in a slow gravitational dance, their arms stretched and distorted by their interactions. Beyond them, the view would become even more crowded, with countless galaxies filling the field of vision, each one a tiny island of light in a vast dark ocean. At that point, Leo, as a shape, would no longer mean anything. The concept of a constellation would feel like a distant memory from a place very far behind you. All that would remain is the tunnel itself, the sense of moving through a layered universe that stretches far beyond any single pattern or name. Now, let's gently return to Earth, because the experience of depth in the sky is something you can touch in a much simpler way. Have you ever looked at a clear night sky and noticed how some stars seem to twinkle more than others? That twinkling, caused by Earth's atmosphere, can sometimes give a subtle hint of which stars are closer or farther, brighter or dimmer. It's not a reliable measure of distance, but it can add a sense of texture to the view. With a telescope or binoculars, that texture deepens. You start to see layers, a bright star in the foreground, a faint cluster of stars behind it, a hazy patch of light that turns out to be a galaxy far beyond. Even without thinking about the numbers, you can feel the depth. It's like looking into a forest. The nearest trees are clear and detailed. Farther back, the shapes blur together. At the very back, the forest becomes a wall of green and shadow. Leo, when you include depth, is like that forest, only made of light and darkness instead of leaves and trunks. Now, let's think about how time adds another layer to this depth. As you look deeper into space, you're also looking further back in time. The nearest stars show you scenes from decades ago. The stars of the Milky Way show you scenes from thousands or millions of years ago. The distant galaxies show you scenes from tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, or even billions. So the tunnel of Leo is also a tunnel through history. You're not just looking across space, you're looking across eras. This means that the size of Leo, when depth is included, is not just measured in kilometres or light years, it's also measured in years, in the age of the light that reaches you. That adds a different kind of scale to the idea of bigness. It turns the constellation into a kind of timeline as well as a region of space. Now, let's gently consider how this affects the way you think about the stars themselves. When you see a bright star in Leo, it's easy to think of it as something that exists now, in the same moment you do. But in reality, you're seeing a version of that star that belongs to the past. The deeper you look, the older the image becomes. So the depth of Leo is also a stack of different moments, layered on top of each other in your view. That idea doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can let it be a quiet background thought, like a soft echo behind the simple beauty of the stars. Now, let's bring this back to the experience of standing under the sky one more time. You're outside or near a window or just imagining the night. You find Leo, you trace its shape. It feels like a picture. Now, let your mind gently add the idea of depth. Not in a precise mathematical way, but in a soft intuitive one. Picture the stars as markers along a long road that stretches away from you. Some are close, some are far, some are unimaginably far. You don't have to see the whole road. You can just know it's there. There's a kind of calm in that knowledge. It reminds you that the universe is bigger than what you can see, but also that you don't have to take it all in at once. You can meet it in small, manageable pieces. A shape, a star, a direction. Somewhere close to the quiet centre of your own experience, there's a region of space that feels almost personal, even if you've never thought of it that way before. It's the small, familiar bubble of the galaxy that surrounds our Sun, a place astronomers often call the solar neighbourhood. This is the part of the Milky Way where our star drifts among its nearest stellar companions, a loose collection of suns that share a general region of space rather than a tight, bound community. And when you compare Leo to this neighbourhood, the constellation begins to take on a new kind of scale, one that bridges the intimate and the immense in a way that's surprisingly gentle to sit with. The solar neighbourhood is not a defined boundary in the way a city has borders or a country has edges. It's more of a convenience, a term used to describe the stars within a few dozen or a few hundred light years of the Sun. These are the stars close enough for astronomers to study in greater detail, close enough for their motions and properties to be measured with more precision, close enough to feel like part of the same general area of the galaxy as we are. Within this region, stars are still separated by enormous distances, but compared to the wider Milky Way, they form a kind of local community. If the galaxy were a vast ocean, the solar neighbourhood would be the stretch of water you could see from the shore, not the whole sea, but enough to give you a sense of what it's like. Now let's gently place Leo into that picture. Some of the stars that make up the familiar shape of the lion are part of this solar neighbourhood. Denebula, for example, at about 36 light-years away, is very much in our local region. Regulus, at around 79 light-years, is still considered nearby in cosmic terms. A handful of other stars in Leo also fall within a couple of hundred light-years of the Sun. That means when you look at Leo, you are, in part, looking at your own neighbourhood in the galaxy. You're seeing suns that share roughly the same part of the Milky Way as we do, orbiting the galactic centre at similar distances, moving through the same broad spiral arm, immersed in the same large-scale environment of gas, dust and dark matter. But Leo doesn't stop there. As you've already explored, the constellation's depth extends well beyond the local region. Some of its stars are several hundred light-years away, and beyond them lie the distant galaxies that sit far outside the Milky Way altogether. So when you compare Leo to the solar neighbourhood, you're comparing a small familiar patch of the galaxy to a much longer, deeper corridor of space. Let's slow down and make the solar neighbourhood feel a little more real. Our Sun is not alone. It drifts through space alongside other stars, each one following its own orbit around the centre of the Milky Way. The nearest star system to us, Alpha Centauri, is about 4.3 light-years away. Beyond that, there are dozens of stars within 10 light-years, hundreds within 50 light-years, and thousands within 100 light-years. These stars form a loose three-dimensional cloud around the Sun, often called the local bubble. This region is filled with a thin, hot gas and relatively little dense dust, making it somewhat more transparent than other parts of the galaxy. Within this bubble, stars come in many types. Small, dim red dwarfs, which are the most common kind of star in the galaxy. Sun-like stars, steady and long-lived. Hot, massive stars that burn brightly but briefly. White dwarfs, the dense, fading remnants of stars that have already lived out their main lives. This variety gives the solar neighbourhood a kind of quiet richness. It's not dramatic in the way a star-forming region or a galactic centre might be, but it's full of subtle detail and slow, ongoing change. Now, imagine that entire region as a kind of sphere around the Sun, extending out to, say, 100 light-years in all directions. That sphere would contain thousands of stars, each one with its own potential systems of planets, its own history, its own future. In that context, the part of Leo that lies within this sphere is just a small slice of a much larger pattern. Let's picture that slice. From Earth, you look out toward Leo. Within the first 100 light-years of that line of sight, you encounter a handful of stars that are part of the lion's shape. These stars are part of your local galactic environment. They share roughly the same background of gas and dust, the same overall motion around the galaxy. But if you turn and look in another direction, you'll see a different set of nearby stars. Orion, Ursa Major, Scorpius, and other constellations all include stars that are part of the same local bubble, just in different directions. So the solar neighbourhood is not something you see in one place in the sky. It's something that surrounds you. Leo, in this sense, is like a window into one part of that surrounding space. Now, let's gently compare sizes again, because this is where things start to feel interesting in a very tangible way. If you imagine the solar neighbourhood as a sphere with a radius of about 100 light-years, that's a region 200 light-years across from one side to the other. That's already a huge volume of space by any everyday standard. Now think about the real space width of Leo, which is on the order of 130 light-years, and its depth, which extends a few hundred light-years for its stars. Those two scales are similar. That means the physical spread of Leo's stars is comparable to the size of the entire region of space we often think of as our local stellar environment. In other words, Leo, as a three-dimensional structure of stars, is about as large as the whole neighbourhood of stars around the Sun. That's a subtle but powerful shift in perspective. From Earth, Leo feels like a piece of the sky, something you can point to and say, there it is. The solar neighbourhood feels like an abstract concept, something that exists all around you but doesn't have a clear shape. But in physical terms, they are playing in the same range of sizes. Let's explore that idea a little more slowly. Imagine you could draw a giant invisible bubble around the Sun, marking the stars within 100 light-years. That bubble would contain thousands of stars. Now imagine stretching Leo out in space, placing its nearest stars near the front of the bubble and its farthest stars near the back. The lion would fill a significant portion of that bubble. It wouldn't fill it completely, but it would occupy a large chunk of its volume. So when you look at Leo, you're not just looking at a distant separate region of the galaxy. You're looking at a structure that overlaps in scale with your own local cosmic environment. That overlap is one of the reasons Leo can feel both familiar and vast at the same time. Now, let's think about how this comparison changes the way you see the Sun itself. The Sun is just one star among many in the solar neighbourhood. It's not especially large or especially small. It's not particularly bright or particularly dim. It's a fairly typical star, living a long, steady life. When you compare the Sun's environment to Leo, you start to see how ordinary our place in the galaxy really is. The stars of Leo are not part of some exotic, distant region of the Milky Way. Many of them are part of the same general area we are. That can be a comforting thought. It suggests that the universe is not divided into sharply separate zones of here and there. It's more of a continuous landscape, with our Sun and the stars of Leo all drifting through the same broad cosmic terrain. Now, let's gently widen the comparison again. The Milky Way is about 100,000 light-years across. If the solar neighbourhood is a 200 light-year wide bubble, it's a tiny fraction of the galaxy's full size. It's like a small town in a vast country. Leo, as a real space structure of stars, is roughly the size of that small town. So when you compare Leo to the Milky Way as a whole, both the constellation and our local region feel quite small. But when you compare Leo to the solar neighbourhood, it suddenly feels quite large. This is one of those moments where scale becomes relative. Big and small are not fixed categories. They depend on what you're comparing things to. Now, let's think about how astronomers actually study the solar neighbourhood and Leo. For nearby stars, astronomers can measure distances using a technique called parallax, which relies on observing how a star's position appears to shift slightly as the Earth moves around the Sun. This method works well for stars within a few hundred light-years. Many of the stars in Leo fall within this range, which means their distances and motions are known with relatively good precision. They are part of the same data set, the same catalogues, the same maps of our local region of the galaxy. So in a very practical sense, the stars of Leo and the stars near the Sun are part of the same scientific picture. But beyond a few hundred light-years, parallax becomes harder to measure. Astronomers have to rely on other methods, such as analysing a star's brightness and spectrum, to estimate how far away it is. So as you move deeper into Leo's corridor, the stars and galaxies you encounter become less and less tied to the detailed, intimate map we have of our local space. The view becomes broader, more statistical, more about large-scale structure than individual objects. This is another way in which Leo bridges two different scales of astronomy. It includes stars that are part of the well-mapped, well-known local region, and it points toward objects that belong to the vast, distant universe beyond our galaxy. Now, let's consider what this means for the idea of neighbourhood itself. On Earth, a neighbourhood is a place where things are close enough to interact easily. You can walk to a neighbour's house. You can hear sounds from nearby streets. There's a sense of shared space. In space, a neighbourhood is a much looser concept. Even the nearest stars are light years away. There's no easy interaction, no quick visit, no casual exchange. So when we say that some of Leo's stars are part of our solar neighbourhood, what we really mean is that they share a general region of the galaxy with us. Not that they are close in any everyday sense. That can feel a little abstract, but it's also a reminder of just how big space really is. Now let's bring this back to the experience of looking up at the sky. You find Leo. You trace its shape. It feels like something out there, something separate from you. But when you think about the solar neighbourhood, you realise that some of the stars in that shape are part of the same local cloud of stars that surrounds the Sun. In a way, they are part of your broader cosmic environment. It's like recognising a distant hill as part of the same landscape you're standing in, even if you can't walk there. Now, let's gently turn this idea around and think about how the solar neighbourhood looks from one of Leo's stars. Imagine standing on a planet orbiting Regulus, if such a planet exists. You look out into the galaxy. The Sun would be a faint star among many others. It wouldn't stand out. It wouldn't be marked in any special way. From there, the solar neighbourhood would look like just another patch of the Milky Way, no more or less special than any other. So the sense of here and there is always tied to where you stand. This is another quiet way in which Leo and the solar neighbourhood are similar. They are both defined by perspective. Now let's think about time again, because time adds another layer to this comparison. The stars in the solar neighbourhood are not static. They are moving. Over millions of years, the composition of the local region changes. New stars drift in. Old ones drift out. The same is true for Leo. The stars that form the lion's shape today may not be part of the solar neighbourhood in the distant future. Some may move closer to the Sun's region. Others may move farther away. So the overlap between Leo and the solar neighbourhood is not fixed. It's a momentary arrangement in a long, slow flow of stars through the galaxy. That idea can feel both fleeting and comforting. It suggests that everything is part of a larger movement, even when it feels still. Now, let's gently consider what this means for you, here and now. You are part of a planet that orbits a star, that drifts through a local region of the galaxy, that looks out toward a pattern of stars called Leo. Your own place in the universe is connected, in a very loose but real way, to the stars that make up that shape, not because you will ever visit them, or they will ever visit you, but because you share the same broad cosmic environment. You're part of the same galaxy, the same spiral arm, the same long, slow rotation around a distant centre. There's a kind of quiet kinship in that idea. Now, let's bring this back down to a calm, grounded experience again. You're here, in a room, in a bed, on a chair, breathing steadily. The world around you is close, tangible, easy to touch. Above you, a region of the galaxy the size of your entire local stellar neighbourhood is arranged into the shape of a lion. That contrast can feel almost playful. Something as vast as your local corner of the Milky Way turned into a picture you can recognise and remember. For now, let the idea of the solar neighbourhood and the lion stars rest quietly together in your mind. Two overlapping regions of space, one defined by proximity to the sun, the other defined by a pattern in the sky, both drifting through the same vast rotating galaxy, connected by nothing more than distance, motion, and a simple act of looking up. Far out beyond the soft glow of the stars you can see with your own eyes, there is a broader backdrop that holds everything in place, a vast, faint structure that you don't usually think about when you're tracing the shape of a lion in the sky. This is the Milky Way itself, the galaxy that contains Leo, the sun, and every other star you can see on a clear night. When you begin to compare the constellation to the galaxy, the scale of both shifts in a quiet but powerful way, and the familiar pattern of Leo starts to feel like a small window cut into something far larger. From Earth, the Milky Way often appears as a pale, misty band stretching across the sky, a soft river of light that can be easy to miss if there are streetlights nearby or the moon is bright. That band is not a cloud or a glow in our atmosphere. It's the combined light of billions of distant stars packed so closely together along the plane of the galaxy that their individual points blur into a continuous haze. When you look at Leo, you're looking away from the densest part of that band, out toward a region of the galaxy where the stars are more spread out. That's one of the reasons Leo feels clean and distinct in the sky. There's less background glow, fewer overlapping stars, more dark space between the points of light that make up its shape. So even in the way it appears, Leo is already having a quiet conversation with the larger structure of the galaxy around it. Let's start by gently sketching what the Milky Way actually is, because it's easy to forget just how big and complex it is compared to anything you can see with the naked eye. The Milky Way is a barred spiral galaxy, a vast flattened disk of stars, gas and dust, with a dense central bulge and long curving arms that wrap around it. It's about 100,000 light-years across, and perhaps a few thousand light-years thick in its main disk, with a halo of older stars and dark matter extending far beyond that. Our sun sits in one of the spiral arms, not near the centre, but about halfway out, in a region that's relatively calm compared to the crowded, energetic core of the galaxy. So when you look at Leo, you're looking from one small point in this enormous structure out toward another small patch of it. Now, let's think about where Leo fits into this picture. The stars that make up Leo are part of the same spiral arm as the sun, or in nearby arms. They're not part of the galactic centre. They're not part of the outermost edge of the galaxy. They're in the middle regions, in a kind of broad, shared neighbourhood within the Milky Way. If you could step far enough away from the galaxy to see it as a whole, and then zoom back in on the region where the Sun and Leo stars are located, you would see a wide, gently curving band of stars, and within that band a scattering of points that happen to line up from Earth's perspective into the shape of a lion. From that vantage point, Leo would not stand out at all. It would blend into the general star field, one small arrangement among countless others. This is one of the key differences between a constellation and a galaxy. A galaxy is a physical structure. It's a system bound together by gravity, with stars orbiting a common centre, influenced by a shared distribution of mass, gas, and dark matter. The Milky Way is a real three-dimensional object that exists independently of where you stand. A constellation, on the other hand, is a perspective. It's a pattern created by your position within the galaxy. Move far enough away, and the pattern disappears. So when you compare Leo to the Milky Way, you're really comparing a human-made framework to a natural cosmic structure. That doesn't make the framework meaningless, it just places it in a different category. Let's explore that difference a little more slowly. If you were to travel through the Milky Way, moving from star to star, you would experience a continuous landscape. There would be no moment where you cross an invisible line and suddenly leave one constellation and enter another. Space doesn't care about the boundaries we draw on our star maps. You could pass from a region of space that we label as Leo into one we label as Virgo or Cancer without noticing any physical change at all. The stars would continue to be scattered. The gas and dust would continue to drift. The galaxy's gravitational field would continue to guide everything along its slow, wide rotation. The galaxy is seamless. The constellations are segmented. Now, let's think about how big Leo really is compared to the Milky Way in physical terms. As you've already explored, the real space spread of Leo stars might be on the order of a few hundred light-years across. That's large on a human scale, and even large compared to many star clusters or local regions of space. But the Milky Way is about 100,000 light-years across, so if you imagine the galaxy as a vast circular plane, Leo would be like a small village somewhere on that plane. It has a size, it occupies a region. But it's tiny compared to the whole. This comparison can feel a little humbling, but it can also be grounding. It places both Leo and our own place in the universe into a broader context. Let's bring the Sun into this comparison for a moment. The Sun is one star among hundreds of billions in the Milky Way. It doesn't sit in a particularly special position. It's not near the centre, where things are dense and energetic. It's not at the very edge, where stars are sparse and the galaxy fades into intergalactic space. It's in a fairly ordinary part of a spiral arm. Leo's stars share that same general environment. So when you look at Leo, you're not looking at something that exists in a dramatically different part of the galaxy than you do. You're looking across a region that is, in a broad sense, part of your own cosmic backyard. Now let's think about the structure of the galaxy itself, because it adds another layer to this comparison. The Milky Way's spiral arms are not solid structures like the arms of a starfish. They're more like waves moving through the disk of the galaxy. Stars and gas move in and out of these arms over time, slowing down as they pass through the denser regions, then speeding up again as they move on. So the stars of Leo are not permanently in a particular arm in the way you might think of a city being in a particular state or country. They are part of a dynamic flow. Over hundreds of millions of years they will drift relative to the spiral arms, passing through different regions of the galaxy. That means the relationship between Leo and the Milky Way is not fixed. It's a snapshot in a long, slow process. Now, let's gently consider how this affects the way you see the sky. When you look up and find Leo, it feels like a stable, reliable pattern. It's been there as long as you can remember. It will be there tomorrow night. It will be there next year. But when you compare that sense of stability to the galaxy's slow, massive motion, you start to see how relative that feeling is. The Milky Way is rotating. The Sun is orbiting the galactic centre at about 220 kilometres per second. The stars of Leo are doing something similar. In the time it takes for the Sun to complete one orbit around the galaxy, about 225 million years, the shape of Leo will have changed beyond recognition. So the constellation is stable on a human timescale, but fleeting on a galactic one. Now let's widen the comparison even further, because the Milky Way itself is not isolated. Our galaxy is part of a small group of galaxies called the Local Group. This includes the Andromeda Galaxy, the Triangulum Galaxy, and dozens of smaller dwarf galaxies. All of these are bound together by gravity, slowly moving in a complex dance that will, over billions of years, likely lead to mergers and reshaping on a grand scale. So when you compare Leo to the galaxy, you're still not at the larger scale. You're at one layer in a much bigger cosmic structure. From that perspective, Leo's a very small part of a medium-sized galaxy, which is itself a small part of a group of galaxies, which is itself part of a vast network of galaxy clusters and filaments that stretch across the observable universe. But let's not rush through those layers. Let's stay with the Milky Way for a moment, because it's already more than enough to hold in your thoughts. The galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. Each of those stars may have its own system of planets. Some of those planets may be rocky, some may have atmospheres, some may be in the right conditions for liquid water. So when you look at Leo, you're looking at a tiny subset of a galaxy that might contain billions of potential worlds. That doesn't mean those worlds are connected to Leo in any special way. It just means that the region of space you're tracing with your eyes is part of a much larger tapestry. Now let's think about the Milky Way's appearance from Earth, because this is where the constellation versus galaxy comparison becomes something you can actually feel. On a very dark night, far from city lights, the Milky Way can look like a glowing arch across the sky. It's not a sharp line. It's a soft, uneven band, brighter in some places, dimmer in others. That brightness comes from looking along the plane of the galaxy, where stars are more densely packed. Leo sits away from that bright band, in a region where you're looking more out of the plane of the galaxy, into a direction with fewer stars in the foreground. That's why the background behind Leo often looks darker and cleaner. So when you look at Leo, you're not just seeing a pattern of stars, you're also seeing a particular orientation of your view relative to the galaxy. You're looking through a thinner slice of the Milky Way's disk, which gives you a clearer view of distant galaxies beyond it. This is one of the reasons why the Leo triplet and other galaxies in that region are popular targets for amateur astronomers. There's less galactic clutter in the way. So in a very practical sense, Leo is a kind of window in the galaxy. Now let's gently explore how this window idea changes the way you think about the constellation. If Leo is a window, then the stars that make up its shape are like frames. They outline a view into deeper space. Those stars are part of the Milky Way. The things you see beyond them, the distant galaxies, are not. So when you compare the constellation to the galaxy, you're really comparing the foreground to the background. That can be a calming way to think about it. The Milky Way is the environment you're in. Leo is a pattern within that environment. Beyond both is the wider universe. Now, let's bring this back to the idea of size again. In physical terms, the Milky Way is about 1,000 times wider than the real space spread of Leo's stars. That's a big difference. But in the sky, the Milky Way can feel like a backdrop, while Leo can feel like a main feature. This is another example of how perception and physical reality don't always line up in obvious ways. Your attention, not just the size of something, determines how important it feels. Now, let's gently think about what it would be like to leave the Milky Way entirely. Imagine drifting far enough away that the galaxy becomes a faint glowing spiral behind you. From that distance, the individual stars are no longer visible. They blend into a smooth, soft light. Leo, as a pattern of stars, would be completely gone. There would be no lion, no constellation, no recognizable shapes. All that would remain is the galaxy itself, a single distant object among many others. That thought can feel a little dissolving, but it can also feel peaceful. It suggests that the things we recognize and name are part of a much larger, quieter whole. Now let's gently return to Earth one more time. You're here, in a place where the world is measured in meters and minutes, you look up at a sky that's measured in light years and millions of years. You find Leo, you trace its shape. It feels like something you can hold in your mind. At the same time, you know that this shape exists within a galaxy so large that the constellation itself is just a small part of it. Both of those experiences are happening at once. You don't have to resolve them into a single tidy picture. You can let them coexist. There's a kind of quiet balance in that. The small and the large, the familiar and the vast, the pattern and the structure. Leo gives you a way to touch the galaxy without having to take it all in at once. It offers you a handle, a place to start. Instead of beginning with a number or a measurement, let's start with a feeling. Because when people ask how big something is in the sky, they're often reaching for something more than just a distance. They're reaching for a way to place themselves in relation to what they're looking at. Size in astronomy is not a single simple idea. It's a collection of different ways of comparing, framing and understanding things that exist far beyond the scales of everyday life. On Earth, size is usually straightforward. A room is bigger than a closet. A city is bigger than a town. A mountain is bigger than a hill. You can walk around these things, touch them, measure them with steps, meters or miles. Your body is part of the measuring process. You feel size as much as you calculate it. The sky doesn't offer you that kind of physical feedback. When you look up, you can't walk toward a star. You can't stretch your arms around a galaxy. All you have is light, arriving at your eyes from across space. So astronomers have had to invent different ways of talking about size, ways that fit a universe where touch and direct experience are not possible. Let's begin with the most immediate kind of size you experience when you look at something in the sky. How much of your view it takes up. This is called angular size. It's a measure of how wide something appears, not how wide it actually is. The moon and the sun, for example, have almost the same angular size in the sky. They both look about half a degree wide. But in physical terms, the sun is about 400 times larger than the moon. The reason they look the same size is because the sun is also about 400 times farther away. So when you say something in the sky looks big, what you're really saying is that it covers a large angle in your field of view. Leo, in this sense, is big. It stretches across about 50 degrees of sky, which is a noticeable chunk of the dome above you. You can't see it all at once unless you move your head or your eyes. It occupies space in your awareness. But that kind of bigness doesn't tell you how much space Leo actually occupies in the galaxy. It only tells you how it's projected onto your view. This is where physical size comes in. Physical size is what you would measure if you could somehow lay a ruler across an object in space. For a star, that might mean its diameter. For a planet, it might mean its radius. For a galaxy, it might mean the width of its disk. For a constellation, physical size becomes a trickier concept because a constellation is not a single object. It's a collection of objects at different distances scattered through a region of space. So when you ask, how big is Leo? In a physical sense, the answer depends on which part of Leo you're talking about. Are you measuring the distance between its nearest and farthest stars, the width of its spread at an average distance, or the full depth of the corridor of space it points into? All of those are valid, but they're measuring different things. Let's gently separate a few of these ideas. One way to think about size in astronomy is linear size, the straight line distance from one side of something to the other. If you were measuring a star, that might be its diameter. If you were measuring a galaxy, that might be the width of its disk. For Leo, you can approximate a linear size by taking its angular width in the sky and combining that with an average distance to its stars. That's how you get a sense of its real space width, something on the order of 100 light years or more. But that linear size only describes one slice of the constellation. It doesn't capture its depth, the way its stars are spread out along your line of sight. So you can also talk about depth as a kind of size, measuring how far apart the nearest and farthest stars in the constellation are. That gives you another dimension, another way of thinking about how much space Leo occupies. Then there's volume, which is what you get when you combine width, height and depth. In that sense, Leo can be thought of as occupying a rough three-dimensional region of space, a kind of irregular, invisible cloud of stars spread across a few hundred light years. But even that doesn't fully capture what Leo is, because beyond its stars there's the deeper corridor of space that includes distant galaxies and intergalactic regions. So size in this context starts to blur into the idea of perspective. Now let's step back and look at how astronomers talk about the size of different kinds of objects, because this can help clarify why the word means so many things at once. When astronomers talk about the size of a planet, they usually mean its physical diameter or radius. That tells you how big the solid or gaseous body actually is. When they talk about the size of a star, they often mean its radius as well, though stars don't have a hard surface in the way planets do. The size of a star is usually defined by where its light effectively stops being produced, a kind of fuzzy boundary rather than a solid edge. When they talk about the size of a galaxy, they might mean the extent of its visible disk, or the reach of its halo of stars and dark matter, which can extend far beyond what you can easily see. And when they talk about the size of a cluster of galaxies, they might mean the region over which those galaxies are gravitationally bound, which can be millions of light years across. Each of these definitions of size is tailored to the kind of object being studied. Constellations don't fit neatly into any of those categories. They are not physical objects. They are not bound systems. They are not clusters or clouds. They are groupings defined by direction, not by gravity. So when astronomers refer to the size of a constellation, they are almost always talking about its angular size, how much of the sky it covers. That's why you'll see star charts listing constellations by their area in square degrees rather than by any physical measurement. In that sense, Leo is one of the larger constellations, covering a significant portion of the celestial sphere. But that doesn't mean it contains more stars than a smaller-looking constellation, or that it occupies a larger physical region of space. It just means it covers more of your sky. Now let's think about why this distinction matters in a gentle human way. When you look at something and ask how big it is, you're usually trying to get a sense of how it compares to other things. Is it bigger than that? Smaller than this? Large enough to notice? Small enough to ignore? In the sky, those comparisons can be misleading. A tiny-looking star might be much larger than a big-looking planet. A faint galaxy might be physically enormous compared to a bright cluster of stars. A constellation that covers a small area of the sky might contain stars that are much farther away and spread across a larger volume of space than a constellation that looks wide. So, size in astronomy often becomes a two-part question. How big does it look, and how big is it really? Let's gently explore a few examples to see how this plays out. The Sun, in physical terms, is about 1.4 million kilometres across. That's huge compared to Earth. You could fit more than 1 million Earths inside it by volume, but in the sky, the Sun and the Moon look about the same size. They both fit neatly between your thumb and forefinger held at arm's length, so visually they feel similar in size even though physically they are very different. Now think about a galaxy like the one behind Leo, part of the Leo triplet. Physically it might be tens of thousands of light years across, containing billions of stars, but in the sky it appears as a tiny faint smudge, something you might miss entirely without a telescope. So visually it feels small, even though physically it is enormous. Constellations sit somewhere in between these extremes. They are visually large, covering a lot of sky, but physically they are not single, enormous objects. They are collections of things spread out over space, so their size depends on which aspect you're focusing on. Now, let's bring this back to Leo specifically. If you talk about Leo's size in terms of angular area, you might say it covers about 947 square degrees of the sky, making it one of the larger constellations. That's a way of quantifying how much of the celestial sphere it occupies. If you talk about its size in terms of physical spread, you might say its stars are scattered across a region of space that is a few hundred light years wide and deep. If you talk about its size in terms of the corridor of space it points into, you might say it opens onto a region of the universe that extends tens of millions of light years to distant galaxies and beyond. All of those statements can be true at the same time. They're just answering different versions of the same question. Now let's think about another way astronomers think about size, and that's through mass rather than distance. Mass tells you how much matter something contains, not how much space it takes up. A small, dense object can have more mass than a large, diffuse one. A neutron star, for example, is only a few kilometres across but contains more mass than the Sun. In that sense, size and importance are not the same thing. Leo, as a constellation, doesn't have a meaningful mass in this way, because it's not a bound system, but the stars within it do. Regulus has several times the mass of the Sun. Other stars in Leo have less. The galaxies behind Leo have enormous masses, far exceeding anything in our local part of the Milky Way. So when you look at Leo, you're also looking at a wide range of masses, from small red dwarf stars to massive spiral galaxies. That adds another layer to the idea of size, one that's not about how much space something occupies, but how much substance it contains. Now, let's gently explore how time plays into this as well. In astronomy, size can change over time. Stars grow and shrink. They expand into red giants and then collapse into white dwarfs, neutron stars or black holes. Galaxies merge and grow larger. Clusters of galaxies form and expand. So when you talk about the size of something in the sky, you're often talking about its size at a particular moment in its long history. The Sun is the size it is now, but it will be much larger in the distant future. The Milky Way is the size it is now, but it will change when it merges with Andromeda. Leo, as a pattern of stars, is the size it is now, but it will change as its stars move and its shape dissolves. So size, in this sense, is also a snapshot. Now let's bring this back to the way you experience the sky in a quiet, personal way. When you look up and find Leo, you don't think about square degrees, light years, or masses. You think, there it is. The lion fits into your view. It feels like a thing you can hold in your mind. That's a kind of size too. It's a mental size, a measure of how much space something takes up in your awareness. Leo takes up enough space in your awareness to be recognizable, to be familiar, to be a companion in the sky. The Milky Way, by contrast, can feel more like a background, something that's always there but not always noticed. So in your experience, Leo might feel bigger in a certain way, even though physically it's much smaller than the galaxy. This highlights something important. Size is not just a property of objects, it's also a property of attention. What you focus on grows in importance. What you ignore fades into the background. Now let's gently consider how this idea can help make sense of the vastness of the universe without feeling overwhelmed by it. If you tried to hold the entire scale of the cosmos in your mind all at once, from atoms to galaxies to the edge of the observable universe, it would likely feel too big to comfortably think about. So you start with something manageable, a star, a shape, a constellation. From there, you can slowly expand your view, adding layers of size, depth, and distance as you go. Leo, in this sense, is not just an object of study. It's a starting point. It gives you a place to begin exploring what big really means in a universe where the usual human measures don't quite apply. Now let's think about one more subtle way astronomers talk about size, and that's through brightness and luminosity. A star that looks bright in the sky might be physically small but close to you, or physically large but far away. A star that looks dim might be physically huge but very distant. So brightness is not a reliable guide to physical size. Regulus, for example, looks bright because it's both relatively luminous and relatively close. Other stars in Leo might be physically larger or more massive but look dimmer because they're farther away. So when you look at Leo and see a mix of bright and faint stars, you're seeing a mix of sizes, distances, and energies all projected into a single, simple picture. Now let's gently bring all of these threads together. In astronomy, size can mean how wide something looks, how much space it occupies, how much mass it contains, how much light it produces, or how it changes over time. For a constellation like Leo, size is mostly about perspective and projection. It's about how a region of the sky is defined and how a pattern of stars is seen from one particular place in the galaxy. So when you ask how big Leo is, you're really asking a layered question. How big does it look? How big is the region of space its stars occupy? How big is the corridor of the universe it points into? How big is it in your own awareness? All of those answers can exist at the same time without cancelling each other out. Now, let's return to the quiet experience of looking up one more time. You find Leo. You trace its shape. It feels simple and familiar. Behind that simple feeling, there is a web of meanings, measurements, and scales that stretch from your own body to the farthest reaches of the universe. You don't have to hold all of that at once. You can let it drift in and out of focus. There's a certain calm in knowing that big doesn't have to be a single fixed idea. It can be flexible, layered, and gentle, not as a number to be calculated, but as a way of relating to something far beyond your everyday world, a way of reaching out quietly to a universe that is always larger than any single measure, and yet close enough to touch in a simple, familiar pattern of stars above you. Far away from the place you're resting right now, beyond the thin layer of air that wraps around the Earth and the familiar glow of the sun, there are countless other points in the Milky Way where someone or something could look out into space and see a very different sky. From those distant locations, the lion you know so well would not look like a lion at all. It might not even look like a pattern. It would simply be another scattering of lights among many others, arranged by a perspective that has nothing to do with your own. This shift in viewpoint is one of the most quietly powerful ideas in astronomy. The sky you see is not the sky. It is your sky, shaped by where you happen to be in the galaxy at this moment in time. So let's begin by gently letting go of the idea that Leo has a fixed shape, a permanent outline, or a universal identity. The constellation exists because you are here on this planet, orbiting this star, in this part of the Milky Way. Change that position and the lion dissolves. Now, imagine a different place to stand. Picture a star not far from Regulus, perhaps one of the many faint points of light that surround it in space. From a planet orbiting that star, the sun would be just another distant spark, easy to overlook. The night sky there would be filled with stars that are unfamiliar to you, bright points that don't form any of the patterns you recognize. From that vantage point, the stars that make up Leo would be scattered across the sky in a completely different arrangement. Some that appear close together from Earth would now be far apart. Others that seem far apart to you might appear closer. The curve of the lion's head would likely be gone. The line of its back would be broken. The tail would drift off into some other part of the sky entirely. So in a very real sense, Leo only exists for you and for anyone else who happens to be standing close to you in the galaxy. This isn't just a philosophical idea. It's a direct result of geometry. When you look at the sky from Earth, you're seeing a projection of a three-dimensional universe onto a two-dimensional surface, your field of view. The stars line up in certain ways because of where you are relative to them. Move to a different point in space, and those alignments change. Let's gently explore what that means by thinking about a simpler example. Imagine 3 streetlights along a road. From one angle, they might line up perfectly, one behind the other, forming a straight line. From another angle, they might form a triangle. From yet another, they might look like a scattered group. The streetlights themselves haven't moved. Only you have. The stars of Leo are like those streetlights, but separated by tens or hundreds of light years instead of a few meters. Now let's choose a specific place in the Milky Way and imagine the sky from there. Picture a star about 500 light years away from the sun, somewhere deeper in the galaxy's disk. This is not an extreme distance by galactic standards. It's still in the same broad spiral arm, still in the same general region of the Milky Way. From that star's perspective, the Sun and its neighbouring stars would be part of a different pattern entirely. The familiar constellations of Earth's sky would be scrambled. Orion's belt might be broken. The Big Dipper might not exist as a recognisable shape. Leo would be just another loose collection of stars if it stood out at all. This tells you something important. Constellations are not features of the universe. They are features of your location in it. Now, let's gently zoom out even more. Imagine standing near the centre of the Milky Way, in the dense, crowded region where stars are packed much closer together than they are near the Sun. The night sky there would be bright, filled with countless points of light. The background would glow with the combined light of millions of stars. In that environment, individual constellations might be hard to pick out at all. The sky would be too busy, too full. The stars that form Leo would be lost in the crowd, their pattern overwhelmed by the sheer number of nearby suns. From there, the idea of a line in the sky might feel very distant, almost impossible to imagine. Now, imagine going the other way. Picture a place far above the plane of the galaxy, where the density of stars drops off and the Milky Way appears as a glowing band below you. From that vantage point, the galaxy would look like a bright flattened disk stretching across the darkness. In that sky, the stars of Leo would be part of that band, not a distinct shape set against a dark background. The contrast that makes Leo stand out from Earth would be gone. So depending on where you are, Leo can be a clear, recognisable figure, a faint suggestion, or nothing at all. Now let's think about what this means for the idea of seeing. When you look at the sky from Earth, you're not just seeing stars, you're seeing relationships between stars, relationships created by your particular line of sight. Those relationships are local, they belong to your corner of the galaxy. This is one of the reasons why different cultures on Earth have seen different shapes in the same stars. The physical arrangement of the stars hasn't changed much in human history, but the way people group them has. Now imagine how much more that grouping would change if you moved, not just across cultures, but across light years. Let's take another gentle step and imagine a journey through space, stopping at a few points along the way to look back at Leo. Start here, on Earth. You see a lion. Now travel 10 light years in any direction. That's not very far on a galactic scale, but it's far enough to start changing the apparent positions of nearby stars. Some of the closer stars in Leo will shift noticeably against the background of more distant ones. The shape of the lion will still be mostly recognisable, but it will be slightly distorted. Lines will bend. Angles will change. Now travel 50 light years. At this point, the nearest stars in Leo have moved enough in your view that the pattern is starting to break. Some stars that were once part of the outline are now offset. Others have moved closer together. The lion is becoming less clear. Now travel 100 light years. By now, the shape is largely gone. You might still recognise a few familiar stars, but the overall pattern has dissolved into a loose scattering of points, and beyond that, Leo as you know it no longer exists at all. This gradual fading of the pattern as you move away is a gentle reminder that the sky is not a fixed backdrop. It's a dynamic view shaped by your position. Now let's think about how this relates to the idea of size again. From Earth, Leo feels big. It covers a wide area of the sky. It has a presence. From somewhere else in the Milky Way, it might not feel big at all. It might not even be a thing. So size, in this sense, is also tied to viewpoint. What feels large and meaningful from one place can feel small or irrelevant from another. Now, let's imagine something a little more specific and concrete. Picture a planet orbiting a star in a distant part of the galaxy, perhaps in one of the outer spiral arms. From there, the Milky Way might look different. The central bulge might be fainter or brighter depending on the angle. The overall shape of the galaxy in the sky would be different. In that sky, the region where Leo's stars are located would be just one small patch among many. The sun might appear as a faint star, perhaps too dim to notice without special instruments. From that planet, if someone were to draw constellations, they would draw entirely different ones. They would connect different stars, see different shapes, tell different stories. So in that sense, every place in the galaxy has its own sky, its own set of patterns, its own constellations. Now let's gently think about what stays the same, even when the patterns change. The stars themselves are still there. Regulus is still a fast-spinning luminous star. Denebula is still a bright young sun. Algeba is still a complex system of stars. Their physical properties don't change just because you move. What changes is how they line up in your view. This is another quiet lesson about perspective. The underlying reality remains, even as the appearance shifts. Now let's consider how time and motion combine with this change in viewpoint. The stars of Leo are moving through the galaxy. Over thousands and millions of years, their positions relative to each other will change, even from Earth's perspective. So even if you stay in the same place, the sky itself is slowly changing. The line you see now is not the line people saw tens of thousands of years ago, and it will not be the line people see tens of thousands of years from now. From another place in the galaxy, this change would be even more pronounced. So the idea of seeing Leo from somewhere else can also be extended into the idea of seeing Leo from another time. Both shifts, in space and in time, transform the pattern. Now, let's gently imagine a place far, far away. Picture a star on the opposite side of the Milky Way, tens of thousands of light years from the Sun. From there, the Sun would be on the far side of the galaxy, hidden behind dense clouds of gas and dust. The region of space that contains Leo's stars would be part of a distant spiral arm, perhaps faint or obscured. From that perspective, the stars that form Leo might not be visible at all to the naked eye. So in that sky, Leo wouldn't just be distorted, it would be invisible. This is a reminder that what you see in the sky is not just about geometry, it's also about what light can reach you. Dust, gas, and distance all play a role in shaping what's visible. Now, let's gently return to a closer, more personal scale again. You're here, in this part of the galaxy, and this is the sky you get. This is the version of the universe that light delivers to you. You could imagine other skies, other patterns, other lines, or other shapes, but this one is yours. There's something quietly grounding about that. It suggests that your experience of the cosmos is both unique and shared. Unique because it belongs to your place in space and time. Shared because anyone standing near you in the galaxy would see something very similar. Now, let's think about how this idea connects back to the way humans have used the stars throughout history. People have always used constellations as tools, for navigation, for marking seasons, for telling stories, for making sense of the sky. All of those uses depend on the sky being stable from one night to the next, from one year to the next, and on human timescales, it is, but on galactic timescales, it's not. So the constellations are like temporary maps drawn on a moving landscape. Now let's gently consider what it would mean to draw a map of the sky from another place in the Milky Way. You would choose a few bright stars as reference points. You would connect them into shapes that make sense to you. You would name them, tell stories about them, use them to find your way. Those shapes would feel just as real and meaningful to you as Leo feels to you now. And from Earth, those shapes would be invisible, meaningless, or unrecognizable. So the sky is full of potential constellations, not just the ones we know. Each place in the galaxy carries its own set of possible patterns, waiting for someone to stand there and draw lines between the stars. Now let's bring this back to the idea of size one more time. When you see Leo from Earth, it feels like a large thing, a wide shape, a big presence in the sky. From somewhere else, it might feel small, scattered, or non-existent. So size, once again, turns out to be tied to perspective. What feels large and significant from one place can feel small or irrelevant from another. Now, let's gently let all of this settle into a quieter, simpler idea. The sky you see is a gift of where you are. It's not the only possible sky. It's not a universal one. It's a local view, shaped by your position in a vast rotating galaxy. Leo is part of that view. It's a pattern that belongs to your place, and that doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it more personal. Now let's return to the calm, physical world around you. You're in a space where things have edges, where distances are measured in steps and arm lengths, where sounds and sensations are close and immediate. Above you, there is a sky where distances are measured in light years, where shapes exist because of where you stand, where a lion can appear in a scattering of distant suns. Both of these worlds meet in this moment, in your awareness. You don't have to travel across the galaxy to experience that meeting. You just have to look up, or imagine looking up. A universe full of patterns that depend on where you stand. A galaxy full of perspectives, each one offering a different way to connect distant points of light into something that feels close, recognizable, and for a moment, your own. After spending so much time letting your thoughts wander through distances measured in light years and across views that belong to other corners of the galaxy, there's something quietly comforting about turning your attention back toward the place you're actually in right now. The floor beneath you, the air around you, the steady, familiar pull of gravity that keeps you grounded on this small, moving world. Above all of that, the lion stars still hang in the same place in the sky, unchanged by the long journey your imagination has just taken. So let's begin this return not with a grand conclusion, but with a simple noticing. Notice where you are. Notice how your body feels where it's resting. The weight of your shoulders, the position of your hands, the gentle rise and fall of your breathing. These are things that don't require light years or galaxies to understand. They exist right here, in a space that can be measured in inches and seconds. And yet, above that small, close world, the sky opens into something vast. Leo is still there, not as a three-dimensional region of stars, not as a tunnel through deep space, not as a perspective that changes from one corner of the Milky Way to another, but as a familiar pattern of light in the darkness, a shape you can find again if you step outside, or look through a window, or simply imagine the night sky above you. There's something quietly reassuring about that. No matter how far your thoughts travel, the stars you started with are still waiting for you when you come back. Now, let's gently place Leo back into the everyday rhythm of the world around you. Think about how the constellation moves through your sky over the course of a night. Early in the evening it might be low in the east, just rising above the horizon. As the hours pass, it climbs higher, crossing the sky in a slow, graceful arc. Toward morning, it drifts westward and begins to sink out of view. That motion is not actually Leo moving, it's the Earth turning beneath it. Your planet is spinning, once every 24 hours, carrying you and everything around you along for the ride. The stars are so far away that their own motions are hidden by comparison. They become a fixed backdrop against which the Earth's movement plays out. So when you watch Leo rise and set, you're really watching yourself rotate into and out of its view. This is one of those small, quiet details that can change the way the sky feels. The stars don't just move above you, you move beneath them. Now let's think about how that movement connects you to the lion in a physical way. The Earth is turning at about 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator. Even at higher latitudes, where the speed is slower, you are still moving through space at hundreds of kilometers per hour. At the same time, the Earth is orbiting the Sun at about 30 kilometers per second, and the Sun, along with the rest of the solar system, is orbiting the center of the Milky Way at about 220 kilometers per second. So when you look up at Leo, you're not standing still and looking at a static sky. You're riding on a planet that's moving through a galaxy, that's moving through the universe. All of that motion is wrapped into the simple experience of seeing a few points of light arranged in a familiar shape. There's something gently humbling about that. Now, let's bring the scale down again and think about how people have connected with Leo throughout history. Long before telescopes, long before measurements of light years and galaxies, people looked up and saw the same pattern you see. They traced the same curve of stars and imagined a lion in the sky. For some, that lion was part of a story about heroes and monsters. For others, it was a marker of the seasons, a sign that certain times of year had arrived. For sailors, it might have been a guide for navigation. For farmers, a signal for planting or harvesting. So when you look at Leo, you're not just connecting with distant stars, you're connecting with a long line of human experience, a shared act of looking up and finding meaning in the same points of light. That connection doesn't depend on understanding how far away the stars are or how fast they spin or how they move through the galaxy. It exists at a simpler level in the act of recognition. You see the shape, you know what it's called. That's enough. Now let's gently blend the two views together, the simple and the complex. You can hold in your mind the idea that Regulus is a fast-spinning, massive star nearly 80 light-years away, surrounded by companions and blazing with energy. You can also hold the idea that it's the heart of the lion, a bright point that helps you find a familiar shape in the sky. You don't have to choose one view over the other. They can exist side by side. This is one of the quiet gifts of astronomy. It allows you to move back and forth between wonder and understanding, between story and science, without losing either. Now, let's think about how the night itself changes your experience of Leo. On a clear, dark night, far from city lights, the stars appear sharp and numerous. The background of the sky is deep and dark, and the points of light stand out clearly. In those conditions, Leo feels crisp, its outline easy to trace. In a city, under streetlights and glowing windows, many of the fainter stars disappear. The sky becomes a lighter shade of grey instead of black. The lion's shape becomes simpler, reduced to its brightest points. In both cases, Leo is still there, but your experience of it changes. This is another quiet reminder that what you see in the sky is shaped not just by where you are in the galaxy, but by where you are on Earth. Now, let's think about how the seasons play into this as well. Leo is not always visible in the night sky. At certain times of year it rises during the day and sets before nightfall, hidden in the sun's glare. For weeks or months the lion is there, but you can't see it. Then gradually it returns, rising a little earlier each night, until it's once again a familiar presence in the evening sky. This cycle repeats year after year. So Leo becomes part of the rhythm of time on Earth, not just a fixed pattern in space. You can mark your own life in relation to it. You might remember seeing it during a particular season, in a particular place, at a particular moment. The stars don't know about those moments, but you do. Now let's gently consider how the idea of size and distance fits into this personal experience. When you're lying back and looking at the sky, Leo doesn't feel like it's hundreds of light years wide or millions of light years deep. It feels like it's right there, above you, part of your night. This closeness is an illusion created by distance itself. The stars are so far away that their light reaches you in nearly parallel lines. They appear to sit on a single surface, like points on a dome. So the sky feels like a ceiling rather than a vast layered space. This is not a mistake, it's just how human vision works. And there's something gentle and protective about that illusion. It makes the universe feel approachable, rather than overwhelming. Now let's take a moment to think about what it means to drift back to Earth. It doesn't mean forgetting about the galaxy, the depth, the scale, or the science. It just means letting those ideas settle into the background, like a soft hum rather than a loud presence. You don't have to keep holding all of those measurements and concepts in your mind. You can let them rest. The stars will keep doing what they do whether you think about them or not. Now, let's gently place Leo into the space of your own imagination. Picture the constellation above you, even if you can't see it right now. Imagine the curve of the head, the line of the body, the bright point of Regulus marking the heart. You don't have to visualize it perfectly. A rough impression is enough. Let it float there, steady and calm. Now, let your attention drift back down, from the sky to the space you're in. Notice the sounds around you, if there are any. A distant hum, a quiet room, the faint noise of the world outside. Notice the temperature of the air on your skin, the feeling of the surface you're resting on. These are small, simple things, but they are real in a way that light years and galaxies are not, at least not in a direct physical sense. There's a kind of balance here. The sky offers you vastness. The earth offers you closeness. You don't have to choose between them. You can let them complement each other. Now let's gently think about how Leo fits into the broader story of your own life. You might remember a time when you first learned about constellations. Maybe it was in a book, or from a teacher, or from someone pointing at the sky and naming the stars. At that moment, the sky might have shifted from being a random scattering of lights to being a place with structure and meaning. Leo might have been one of the first shapes you learned to recognize. So for you, the lion might carry a small personal history, even if you don't consciously think about it. The stars become markers not just of space, but of memory. Now, let's consider how that personal history connects to the long, slow history of the stars themselves. Regulus has been shining for millions of years. Denebola, Algebra, and the other stars of Leo have their own long timelines, stretching far back before humans existed and far forward into a future none of us will see. Your own time, by comparison, is very brief. And yet, in this moment, your awareness meets their light. That meeting is fleeting, but it's real. There's something quietly meaningful in that, even if you don't turn it into a grand idea. Now let's gently shift into a more restful frame of mind. You don't have to analyze or compare or measure anything anymore. You can let the sky simply be what it is, a place of light and darkness, a place of patterns and stories, a place of distance and depth, and for you, in this moment, a place of calm. As you rest here, with the thought of the lion stars somewhere above you, you can let your breathing slow, your body settle, your thoughts become softer and less directed. You don't have to follow any particular thread of ideas. You can let them come and go, like clouds passing through the sky. Now, let's gently think about the idea of beneath the stars. It's a simple word, but it carries a lot of meaning. It suggests shelter, a kind of quiet relationship between the ground you stand on and the sky above you. For most of human history, people lived much closer to the night sky than many of us do now. There were no bright city lights to wash it out. The stars were a constant presence. So being beneath the stars was a normal part of life. Even if you live in a place where the sky is often hidden by light or buildings, the stars are still there. They haven't gone anywhere. Leo is still tracing its path across the sky, whether you see it or not. So in a way, you are always beneath the lion stars, even when they're hidden from view. Now, let's bring all of this back into a simple, quiet awareness. You're here. The Earth is turning. The stars are shining. The galaxy is moving. The universe is expanding. All of that is happening whether you think about it or not. And in the middle of all that motion and scale, there is this small, still moment where you are resting and listening and letting your mind wander. You don't have to carry the whole universe with you. You can let it be what it is, vast and distant, while you stay here, in the closeness of your own space. Now, let's imagine, just for a moment, stepping outside on a clear night. You look up. You find Leo. It's there. The same shape it's been for your entire life. The same shape it's been for countless generations before you. You might feel a small sense of recognition, a quiet, there you are, and that's enough. You don't have to measure it, stretch it, or compare it to galaxies. You can just let it be a familiar presence in the sky. As your thoughts begin to slow and settle, you can let the lion stars fade into a gentle background, like a soft nightlight in the distance. They don't need your attention to keep shining. They will be there when you look again. For now, you can let yourself rest in this small, steady place on Earth, held between the ground beneath you and the wide, open sky above you. The journey through depth and scale and perspective can pause here, not because it's finished, but because it doesn't need to be rushed. There will always be another night, another moment to look up, another chance to find the lion again, quietly waiting in the dark as you drift gently onward in your own calm, unhurried rhythm.